of Saturday. It then pushes into the Pennines. Again, freezing rain to start things off on Saturday over the hills. But the east, at least, is going to start off cold with the frost in places. And that means as the rain moves its way into parts of northern England and central Scotland, we are likely to see some sleet and snow in places, but it's going to be patchy and mostly settling over hills. Meanwhile, milder air is making inroads across western parts of the UK, so temperatures back to average for the likes of South Wales and the southwest, but it will continue to feel cold in the east.
Expect a warm front moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Don't miss your chance to be one of 2 big winners in our latest Great British giveaway, as we have 2 prize bundles that have to be won. First, you'll win a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash to spend however you like. You'll also receive the very latest iPhone 16, and we'll send you on a shopping spree with £500 to spend in your favourite store. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday, the 14th of February. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Emma Trimble.
The Munich Security Conference gets underway as Volodymyr Zelensky gears up for a crucial bilateral meeting with US Vice President J.D. Vance. We'll be hearing shortly from the Vice President and bring it to you live on Good Afternoon Britain.
A third Labour MP has come under fire for running a WhatsApp chat which branded veterans and pensioners Nazis. It also featured an AI picture of Rishi Sunak being deported to Rwanda.
It all comes as Rachel Reeves faces further scrutiny over her expensives and her CV. The Prime Minister backs his Chancellor, but has she lost your trust?
And it is, of course, Valentine's Day. Are you doing anything special to celebrate, or is it a load of commercialised nonsense?
So yes, we will be hearing from the American Vice President a little bit later in the show, speaking live in what is a fairly tense moment in Europe. What is the American policy going to be, and how much of this is bluster or negotiation?
Yeah, nothing says Valentine's Day romance like the Munich Security Conference does, Tom. I can't think of a better thing to do with my Valentine's Day than watch the Munich Security Conference. I mean, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what JD Vance says, particularly after all of the news that we saw around that phone call that Donald Trump had with Vladimir Putin and all of those people who are expressing their concerns that he seems to be going over the head of the Ukrainians and coming to some kind of negotiated agreement with the Russian president.
Well, maybe there is a twinge of love here, because we sent over NLAW missiles to the Ukrainians, but Ukrainians don't pronounce the letter W, so they call them NLOVs.
Oh, Tom, that's a majestic segue. I mean, that's good even by your standards. Bravo!
It turns out war is actually much more romantic.
War is love. That's very Orwellian of you.
Love is war, war is love. We have always been at war with East Asia.
Yeah. See, we shouldn't have started out with all of that Shakespeare in the previous show.
Because now we've graduated to Orwell. I don't know, this is going to be the most literary Good Afternoon Britain that we've ever blooming had. No, we will be doing the news, but also something that we do want your views on throughout the programme. But one of the largest fields of gas ever discovered in this country, natural gas beneath our feet. It's been found in Lincolnshire. It could power the UK for 10 years to come, just from our own domestic gas supplies. Do you think we should get it up? Should we frack in Lincolnshire?
And here's a question for viewers. What if we were to frack, get that 112 or so billion into the economy and use that to beef up the army?
Oh, big question there.
To reach that 5% of GDP to spend on defence.
Well, gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved in all of those discussions and so much more. But first, let's get the very latest headlines with Sam Francis.
Tom and Emma, thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon to you. It's just after 12 o'clock, 3 minutes past 12 to be exact. Sir Keir Starmer says Britain is committed to Ukraine being on an irreversible path to joining NATO after the US appeared to rule it out. He made that pledge in a call with President Zelensky ahead of a major security summit in Munich, where world leaders will discuss the ongoing war. It comes after Donald Trump also spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin and agreed to work very closely to end the conflict, raising concerns in Europe. Well, Ukraine's president says Putin isn't preparing for peace, but to continue deceiving the world, he says. Well, world leaders are now beginning to arrive in Munich for that security conference. Among them, Foreign Secretary David Lammy, and he's there to meet allies in Germany, with Ukraine's future high on the agenda of discussion. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has spoken to US President Donald Trump. That conversation took place last night to discuss his upcoming visit to the United States. It also took place during a meeting with Trump's special envoy, Mark Burnett, at Downing Street. And it comes also as the government says it won't be overreacting to Donald Trump's latest tariff threat, with Senior Minister Pat McFadden insisting they will wait to see what happens next. The British Chamber of Commerce warns that a trade war could drive up prices, urging the government to negotiate with the United States. It comes after the president announced plans to impose reciprocal tariffs on countries that charge VAT on US goods. And with £300 billion in UK-US trade at stake, ministers hope Britain could be exempt. The Vatican has confirmed that Pope Francis is being admitted to hospital today for tests and treatment for bronchitis. The 88-year-old has battled long bouts of the illness and was diagnosed again last week. Despite this, he's continued his duties indoors, but has struggled with mobility and suffered 2 recent falls. He'll be treated after completing his audiences today. An Indian man has been found guilty of raping and murdering Irish backpacker Danielle McLaughlin in Goa. Vikat Bhagat attacked the 28-year-old in 2017 and her body was discovered in a field the next day. Her family say justice has finally been achieved after an 8-year trial plagued by delays. A post-mortem found she died from brain damage and strangulation. The family say they're now waiting and watching to see what further legal steps may follow. Rachel Reeves is under pressure over claims she used company expenses to buy gifts and exaggerated her Bank of England experience. An investigation by the BBC found the Chancellor was among 3 staff accused of using expenses to fund their lifestyle. The broadcaster says she left the Bank of England 9 months earlier than stated on her LinkedIn profile. She denies being investigated over expenses, though, and the Prime Minister says he has no concerns about her conduct. But the Tories say the reports raise serious questions. As we, in fact, we'll skip over this story for now. I believe we've already covered the tariffs with Donald Trump. But in other news here at home, bereaved families of terminally ill patients have urged MPs to remember them. That's as they debate assisted dying in Parliament. In a letter, they say memories of their loved ones' deaths will haunt their lives forever and warn MPs their decisions could determine how terminally ill people spend their final moments. It comes as Kim Leadbeater proposes replacing High Court oversight with a panel including psychiatrists and social workers, and she argues it would strengthen protections. Well, love is definitely in the air.
Love is in the air, everywhere I look around.
And that's just Tom and Emma, but so is spending. More than half of Brits are splashing out on their other half this Valentine's Day, with men just edging out women in the romance stakes. A survey also found dinner dates atop of the list, while others are sending cards, buying flowers, or if you're lucky, you may even get a special getaway. But young love comes with the biggest price tag. 65% of 18 to 34-year-olds are set to spend, compared to just 39% of over 55s. And if you're in London, chances are you're feeling extra romantic. It's the most loved-up region, reportedly. But the South West is keeping things more low-key. And just before I hand you back to those loved-up pair, Tom and Emma, this is a real-life whale of a tale. Take a look at this. A kayaker's close encounter with a humpback whale has gone viral. He was briefly trapped in the whale's mouth. Adrian Simancas was kayaking with his father when the massive creature surfaced and took a quick nibble of his yellow kayak. The father, just metres away, caught that jaw-dropping moment on video and urged his son to stay calm. Easier said than done. He thought he'd been swallowed, but was released unharmed. Goodness me, rather him than me. Those are the latest headlines. I'll be back with you in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Well, big thanks to Sam for that. Seems we're more loved up than we first thought, but at least it's nice to see that whales can find love too.
Modern day Jonah. Interesting.
Well, the time is 9 minutes past 12 and the Chancellor is under increased pressure to come clean about her previous employment.
A BBC investigation claims that while she was working for Halifax Bank of Scotland, she was investigated over her use of business expenses and allegations that she used company money to buy handbags, perfume, earrings and wine for colleagues.
Well, the Chancellor's online CV also exaggerated the length of time she worked at the Bank of England. Joining us to discuss it all and dissect what is quite a complicated story is our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, let's start with these expenses. It seems there was an investigation at HBOS when Rachel Reeves worked there.
The BBC say so. They say that both she was investigated and 2 other colleagues. Now, Rachel Reeves, for her part, says she wasn't aware of any investigations and her expenses were signed off. Let's work out what was happening here. There was a credit card you could have. It was an attempt to encourage people to do better. And with that card, you could buy gifts and presents and maybe a meal out for key employees. And that's, I think, what was happening. A motivation card, it was called. And that was what was happening there. It's how this money was being spent spent seems to be at issue. I asked her team, does she recall buying handbags, perfume, earrings, wine for colleagues, as the BBC investigation has said? And she says they say they can't remember what was bought, but there's no investigation. All these expenses were signed off. When she left, no one mentioned anything to her. There's been rumours on the internet about this for a bit. The BBC have given 3 months of an investigation to this, and that's why it's finally emerging. I would say a spokesman for Reeves tells us she wasn't aware of the investigation when nor was she interviewed, and no disciplinary action. The BBC say there was an investigation, but it never concluded.
Isn't one of the sort of issues that has been raised with this is that even if the expenses were signed off, they were being signed off between the three of them, and that whether or not those expenses were allowed, using company money, using bank money to buy £150-odd handbag as a gift for one of those other bosses shows a certain lack of professional discretion. Yes, it was the oversight, wasn't it? Now, there's a lady called Jane Waper, who's a former HR business partner at HBOS. She says, so people are piling in behind Rachel Reeves against this reporting, saying they don't recognise any of the accusations. But that's right, that is the claim, that it was everyone was sorting themselves out for these freebies. But again, Rachel Reeves has no idea of it and no investigation that she was aware of.
And, of course, a motivation card would imply that you are motivating subordinates, people below you. But there was, as Emma's been saying, almost the allegation is that these three people were acting in cahoots, not to help those below them or motivate those below them, but to get gifts for each other. Yes, and we don't know that. And, again, Rachel Reeves denies all wrongdoing, as were the two other witnesses who they are. I'm sure they would too. But, yeah, that's where it is. I mean, this goes back before she was an MP. It's an issue, question mark about her and how, you know, she runs her own her affairs. Now, more publicly, she had to rewrite her online CV for the second time in 3 months. The first time last November, she talked about her role at HBOS, Halifax Bank of Scotland, where all this happened. When she said there she was an economist, was she in customer affairs, and what was her role there? That was tweaked last November. She tweaked it again yesterday when the BBC report came out to show that she worked for 5.5 years at the Bank of England, not nearly 10 years, as she claimed in various speeches and interviews. That's the crucial thing, because her online CV never said 10 years. I think it said 6.5, perhaps. They've taken 9 months off the previous date this week. And yet there was speech after speech after speech when Rachel was the Shadow Chancellor, where she was talking up her role in the Bank of England, where she said she worked there for the best part of a decade. The problem here is that when you have a big job in anyone's life, you know when you start and when you leave and how long you were there for. A big job is working at the Bank of England, no question, bigger than working at HBOS. To not have that date clear in her own mind, I think, or at least not allow, or let's think about nearly 10 years, is wrong. I mean, and they blame an administrative oversight by a member of her team, but of course, I'm not sure that cuts much ice. In my world, it's on you. You can't blame your staff. It's on you. You're in charge. And to be fair to Boris Johnson, whenever he was in trouble in Downing Street, he always took it on the chin. He never blamed his staff.
Moving away from Labour for a moment, what about this talk of a merger between the Tories and Reform?
Yeah, that is all anyone talks about away from the studios of GB News and elsewhere. I've interviewed Sir Edward Lee. He's the father of the House of Commons, elected in 1983, the longest-serving MP, longest-serving Tory MP. He says it is 70% likely Reform or the Tories will come together before the next election, either in a merger, full merger, or an electoral pact. That means standing down in 100 seats, allowing Reform to take on Labour. He says, what is the point? We agree on so much, he says, the two parties. Why fight each other and let Labour in with maybe a third of the vote, like happened in July? But here's what he had to say.
What are the odds on Reform and the Tories merging to be one party at the next election?
Oh, I think very high. I mean...
odds on?
70%.
There you have it, 70% there from Edward Lee. I asked him, he said, our policies are absolutely identical. He said there's no point in spending the next 3 or 4 years scrapping and standing against each other. Let's get it on. He says that a third of Tory MPs privately support it. That will increase as time goes on. He says that Kevin Badenoch has until May, the local elections, to get a proper immigration strategy going, or there'll be slaughter at the polls. And just finally, I did say, will Kevin Badenoch be your leader at the next election? He said, I have no idea. I wish her well.
Interesting.
He's a very senior person, the most senior Tory MP. For him to say that on air to GB News is a moment, and Labour are responding to it. They're saying it's a dodgy backroom deal between Reform and the Tories. That helps Labour because they're losing support to Reform. If Labour can present Reform as a kind of Tory right-wing bandwagon, it might stop the hemorrhaging of support towards Reform. It's all happening.
It is all happening. Well, Chris, we're going to be with you, of course, throughout the programme. We'll see you in a little bit. Let's see if this story develops any further. Christopher Hope, our political editor.
Can't wait to catch up on that podcast.
Oh, yes. Well, let's move back to the Chancellor's own expense account now and discuss it with the Labour councillor for Northolt Mandeville, Dominic Moffat. Dominic, thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. This is a tricky one for the Chancellor. The BBC, which I don't think is the most critical organisation in the world of the government normally, seems to think there was an investigation into her expenses.
Well, good afternoon, Tom. And we don't need the BBC to be critical of the government because GB News is here holding them to account every step of the way. It's really clear to me that this is absolutely a kind of a confected argument. Rachel Reeves, there was a suggestion there was an issue at work. There was the beginning of an investigation, and then there was no investigation. No investigation reported. She's not been found guilty of anything. And innocent until proven guilty is absolutely a key British belief. And Rachel Reeves has been found guilty of nothing.
And is this damaging, Dominic, for Keir Starmer to have his Chancellor constantly under the spotlight for effectively accusations of inflating her CV?
No, absolutely not. I think we absolutely know that Rachel Reeves can be trusted. This government was elected on a foundation of trust, elected on the foundation that the last government could not be trusted. And just as Keir and Angela both committed to stand down if they were found guilty of any rule breaking over COVID lockdowns, we can see that same level of trust in the entire cabinet. And Rachel Reeves is one member of that cabinet, and Rachel Reeves can be trusted and is an honest individual.
Can we see the trust, though? Because she's had to change her CV twice. She said she was an economist at HBOS, and now she says she was working in retail banking. She said that she worked for the Bank of England for the best part of a decade. Now we know it was less than half of that time. I mean, there have been some serious omissions or oversights, at the very least, from the Chancellor.
Discrepancies, shall we say?
So I think there's a couple of points there, aren't there? There's number one is that LinkedIn is not a CV. LinkedIn is a kind of a public presentation of your experience. And she's not corrected her CV, she's changed her LinkedIn. Earlier, you said that she'd done 6 years at the Bank of England. You're now referring to that as less than half of a decade.
That was her original claim. She reduced that by 9 months as a result of the BBC report.
What's clear is that she did work at the Bank of England, she did work at HBOS, and she worked in a managerial role at HBOS. Her time at the Bank of England involved a number of different secondments. So she was working at the Bank of England for that time, but she did other roles as well as that.
But Dominic, even if these expenses were signed off, does it not raise some questions about her professional discretion if she would use bank money, company money, on things like very expensive handbags as gifts for another one of these people in a managerial position? Does that not raise questions maybe about the way that Rachel Reeves, in her position in government, might be quite frivolous in the spending of money, regardless of whether or not that's been signed off?
I think we've been completely clear, and the government has been really clear, that there will not be frivolous spending of money. I don't think we've seen giveaways and handouts from this government, certainly not in any budget, and that is absolutely not the way the government is being run. Claiming expenses in line with your company expense policy is a perfectly legitimate thing to do, and if you've got issues with that, you can take it up with the people who led HBOS. And the country did take it up with the people who led HBOS, which is why I don't think any of them are anymore, and there was an enormous reorganisation within that organisation.
Yeah, indeed, the very opposite of a merger. I just finally, I mean, of course, Rachel Reeves has given pretty profligate pay rises to, for example, train drivers. I mean, almost 20%, if I remember correctly. That's a bit of a splurge, is it not?
What Rachel Reeves has done when it came to the spending in the budget was that she was beginning to fix the foundations of this country, which were rocked by 14 years of Tory mismanagement. It was the...
Did we get anything other than a soundbite out of you?
Absolutely not, Tom.
Fantastic stuff.
It was 14 years of Tory mismanagement that had to be undone.
No, always great to have you on. Thanks so much for joining us here on Good Afternoon.
Good to see you again.
This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's show. We're live on the ground from the Munich Security Conference as we gear up for US Vice President JD Vance's speech following that crucial meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. I mean, maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11. Join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Coldplay? Coldplay. It was
Steve
Coldplay.
Martin, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They did a gig.
Chris Martin. Chris Martin.
Have they apologised for being British?
Yeah,
They did.
they were
They did,
on
yes.
Patrick Christie's programme, I think, last night, weren't they?
Yeah, he was saying...
The clip was, they said they were playing in India somewhere, and they said, you know, thank you very much for a wonderful reception. We almost didn't expect it, and they sort of apologised for being British.
Thanks for welcoming us despite being British.
Yeah, that's right. Mm.
No. I mean, that's a disgrace.
Yes, it is.
I mean, that's absolutely terrible. Why can't we be proud to be British?
It's becoming the norm to feel that you have to apologise all the time for being British, and I think that's wrong.
I think Bono did it about 20, 30 years ago when he was touring with U2, didn't he?
Well, stop it. Let's be proud.
He sang a song.
We've got a lot to be proud of in this country, and it's wrong to make it, and especially if it's... And it probably is filtering down to our children.
Yeah.
This feeling that you've got to apologise for being British, for heaven's sake.
Well, it's back to that old image, isn't it, of an England flag being viewed, someone flying an England flag, and you sort of tut and raise your eyebrows at it, which is just so wrong. You don't get that with any other flag, do you? That we're just meant to be embarrassed by it all.
Yeah, we've got to stop that. We really have.
Yeah, love being British. Wouldn't want to be anything else. Thanks very much.
No,
indeed.
I like being British.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 24 minutes past midday. Now, the future of Ukraine is at the top of the agenda as the Foreign Secretary David Lammy meets with the US Vice President JD Vance in Munich. We can see images of the meeting that happened a little bit earlier today here between those two powerful figures.
Earlier this week, President Trump added doubt whether the USA will continue to support the war-stricken state when agreeing to hold talks with Vladimir Putin.
And this morning, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer reassured President Zelensky they'd have the UK's steadfast support, stating their path to NATO membership was indeed irreversible.
Well, joining us now from Munich is our political correspondent, Catherine Forster. Catherine, what's going on there in Munich?
Yes, good afternoon from Munich. It feels like this
city in southern Germany, in Bavaria, really is the sort of global centre of political gravity at the moment, because of what's been said by President Trump in the last couple of days, because the Vice President, J.D. Vance, is here. And so is Volodymyr Zelensky, of course, the president of Ukraine. We know that Trump spoke to Putin of Russia, that 90-minute phone call the other day. We know they are determined for the war to end, but it feels like Ukraine have been rather left out of this so far. Now, the UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy is here. The Defence Secretary John Healey will be arriving later. The United Kingdom have made it clear that they stand with Ukraine, whatever Ukraine needs. The Prime Minister spoke to Zelensky this morning. We've also learned that he spoke to Donald Trump last night. Trump's special envoy, in fact, was on Downing Street yesterday. I saw him going in, and now J.D. Vance, the Vice President, has been meeting our Foreign Secretary, David Lammy. So intense discussions, of course, about what happens in Ukraine, and very, very different opinions. Europe united in the view that Ukraine must have a say in its own future, that this cannot be something that is pretty much decided above Ukraine's head between Putin and Trump. But Zelensky giving a press conference here, arriving at the security conference, he says that he doesn't see a ready US plan to end the war. He's also said that he still wants Ukraine to be in NATO, when Trump has said he doesn't think that's realistic. He's also said he's not going to accept Russia being given the bits of Ukraine that it's occupied. Again, that flies pretty much in the face of what the US have indicated, and very worryingly too, Zelensky has, in the last hour or so, claimed that Ukrainian intelligence suggests that Russia is preparing for a war against NATO next year. So a lot of alarm in Europe about what happens now, and also the future of NATO defence. Europe as a whole, given that the US has made it clear that we can no longer depend on them for support.
Oh, shocking stuff there out of Zelensky. Just before you go, Catherine, is that real snow behind you on the Christmas trees? Is it that cold?
It is that cold. Yeah, I've been broadcasting outside here for a few hours. It was snowing very heavily when we started. It is that cold. I am thermaled up, but I am shaking, actually, with the cold.
So get warm, and we'll catch up with you a little bit later on. Catherine Forster, thanks very much for joining us.
The things Catherine will do to bring us all a good story. Now, joining us is Colonel Simon Diggins, a retired British Army officer and defence analyst. Simon, can I just put to you what we just heard there from Catherine Forster, this talk of intelligence from the Ukrainians that Russia might be preparing to go to war with NATO?
We've heard very similar stories and very similar analysis from other people. So, for example, the Danish intelligence service recently indicated that Russia could be prepared to fight another sort of revanchist war, another attack war within about a year or so, and a general war with NATO within 5 years. So what we've heard from Ukrainian intelligence fits with that general picture. And of course, it's one of the considerations we need to look at. Now, is this talk about the ceasefire merely an opportunity for Russia to regroup, to sort itself out, and then prepare to go again? That's one of the considerations that those who are concerned with Europe's defence will be looking at.
I mean, that does sound pretty shocking, really, the idea that there could be some sort of wider war dragging in all of these countries. And it comes to the question of whether or not the United States of America would uphold its Article 5 obligation.
Well, America, I think, has actually been very, very helpfully clear. It said we will support Europe, but we will not be suckers. And so the obligation basically falls back onto Europe to look after its own defence. I mean, one of the analysts I read through this morning said basically the American security umbrella is being closed. It doesn't mean that Europe will not be supported by America. It does mean that Europe needs to look to its own defence. Mark Rutte, who's the Secretary General of NATO, earlier on today, said NATO and Europe needs to grow up. And I think that's really the key message. If we don't want this to turn into a phase where Russia has a ceasefire now, then uses the regroup, and then it comes again, then we have a very short time in which to sort ourselves out, and basically, it sounds awful, but to rearm and make sure our defence is strong enough to deter Russia. And that's the key issue. You know, the conversation that we've heard from the Prime Minister and David Lammy earlier on today about irreversible routes to NATO for Ukraine, completely irrelevant. You know, what Ukraine needs is what it's asked for, which is a strategic non-nuclear deterrent, and the defence needs in order to make sure that it's so powerful, so strong, that Russia won't attack again. So, you know, the stuff about going to NATO is, in my view, a kind of smokescreen for avoiding the really hard issue, which is how do we support Ukraine and how do we rearm ourselves so we are strong in our own defence? And those are the key issues that we need to be focused on as a country and in Europe.
Simon, what sort of position are we currently in? Because, of course, we know the army is set to be on track for being so small that it wouldn't even fill Wembley Stadium. Yeah. What sort of position are we in currently if we had to fight a war? And what urgency is there? I know there's been talk of, needing to up our game much faster, that 2.5% of GDP by 2030 is actually not enough, that Donald Trump wants NATO members to be spending 5%. You know, how desperate is the situation for the British Army currently as we stand today?
I would say in a very poor place. I mean, our soldiers are brilliant, and I think the quality of their professionalism and everything goes with it is first class. That hasn't changed. But numbers count, and there is this kind of issue around our numbers. You rightly point that out. The same applies to the Air Force, the same applies to our Navy. You know, we're almost too small now to be effective. You know, and that's been recognised by people like John Healey, the current Secretary of State for Defence, and indeed from the Chief of General Staff, Rody Walker, who's talked about increasing the lethality of the armed forces, but not necessarily talking about the numbers. And that's a recognition by very senior leaders that we are in a very, very poor state. And we need something to change very, very rapidly to do that. And that, unfortunately, does mean money and does mean resources. And politically, for the government, that means looking at where the spending is going currently in lots of other places, which, you know, we can argue about whether it's good or bad, but nonetheless, it's going to other places, and actually redirecting some of that towards the armed forces. And as you rightly point out, 2.5% of GDP is nothing, doesn't even touch the sides. You know, we need to be getting up to 3% plus. You know, Trump, you know, being a good businessman, pitched it at 5%, but it's 3% plus, and that gets us somewhere on a trajectory back towards a robust defence. But we are not there yet, and currently we're sliding, and that's a disaster.
Chancellor might need a few more spreadsheets to try and work out where all that's going to blooming come from. But my goodness me, what a stark assessment of the state of affairs. Colonel Simon Diggins, thanks so much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Really appreciate your time.
Worrying, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come. Councillors have urged the government to change the rules on landlord checks. This following a GB News investigation into grooming gang plans. Yes, a convicted member of a grooming gang. He planned to convert a property into a children's care home. Yeah, we'll give you the gruesome details after your headlines.
Tom, Emma, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. The top story this lunchtime. Sir Keir Starmer says Britain is committed to Ukraine being on an irreversible path to joining the NATO alliance after the US had appeared to rule it out. He made the pledge in a call with President Zelensky ahead of a major security summit in Munich, where world leaders will discuss the ongoing war. It comes after Donald Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin and agreed to work together very closely, they said, to end the conflict, raising concerns in Europe. Ukraine's president, though, says Putin isn't preparing for peace, but to continue deceiving the world. In Munich, Foreign Secretary David Lammy is among those meeting together today in Germany, with Ukraine's future high on the agenda. Pope Francis is being admitted to hospital today for tests and treatment for bronchitis. That's according to the Vatican. In a statement this morning, they said the 88-year-old has battled long bouts of the illness and was diagnosed again last week. Despite that, he is continuing his duties indoors, but has struggled with mobility and suffered 2 recent falls. He's being treated, having completed his audiences earlier this morning. An Indian man has been found guilty of raping and murdering Irish backpacker Danielle McLaughlin in Goa in 2017. The cat attacked the 28-year-old, and her body was discovered in a field the next day. Her family say justice has finally been achieved after an 8-year trial plagued by delays. A post-mortem found she died from brain damage and strangulation. They're now watching to see what further legal steps will follow. And bereaved families of terminally ill patients have urged MPs to remember them as they debate assisted dying. In a letter, they say memories of their loved ones' deaths will haunt us for the rest of their lives, they say, and warn MPs their decisions could determine how terminally ill people spend their final moments. It comes as Labour's Kim Leadbeater proposes replacing High Court oversight with a panel, including psychiatrists and social workers. She argues it would strengthen protections, but opponents, including 5 Labour MPs, say the move would remove judicial safeguards and hand life or death decisions to civil servants. That's the news on GB News. A full roundup at 1 o'clock. Now, though, it's back to Ben and Emma. Tom and Emma.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hello, it's time for your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Now, some of us will see a few sunny breaks today. In fact, some places will have some prolonged sunshine, but for most, largely cloudy, and we have some wet weather coming in from the southwest. That's in association with a frontal system that's gradually making its way northeastwards, and worth bearing in mind that this is going to hit against some relatively cold air. As a result, we could see something a bit wintry, particularly over the high ground of Wales, maybe Northern Ireland as well. Some sleet, some snow, perhaps even a little bit of freezing rain, but for most towards the west-southwest, it's just going to be outbreaks of rain. Like I said, some sunshine further east, but temperatures still a bit below average. Most places only getting to highs in the mid-single figures, something a bit milder trying to come in from the west. So across parts of Wales, southwest England, a bit of a cloudy, damp end to the day. The rain doesn't look especially heavy for the time being, but it is going to pep up a bit as we go overnight. Some heavier bursts perhaps across Northern Ireland, but further north and east, a drier end to the day and some clearer skies to start the night across parts of Scotland and northeast England. And so here temperatures are going to take a little bit of a dip. An early frost is quite likely for some places here. Otherwise, through the night then, we are going to see that rain gradually making its way northeastwards and, as I mentioned, hitting against this colder air. So some snow likely over modest higher ground of parts of Scotland and northern England, and even the potential for some freezing rain. Remember, freezing rain gives some very treacherous icy conditions, so do watch out for that early tomorrow morning. Otherwise, temperatures a little bit on the low side towards the north and east, but further west we have that milder air coming in, so not an especially chilly start to the day. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow then, quite a lot of wet weather around, but it is gradually making its way northeastwards. So in the south-southwest, turning drier and perhaps even brighter by the afternoon. In the southeast, avoiding most of the rain, and also across the far north of Scotland too, avoiding the most of the wet weather as well.
The latest GB News travel.
Good morning, I'm Russell Holding. In Nottinghamshire, the A617 is blocked eastbound by an accident between Winkburn and Hockerton, affecting traffic heading away from Mansfield towards Newark-on-Trent. In Gloucestershire, the A38 is closed each way between Claypits and Cambridge after an accident. A number of train services in Gloucestershire are disrupted because of a signalling problem at Gloucester, with train services suspended between Gloucester and Swindon, Worcester Shrub Hill, Cheltenham Spa and the Severn Tunnel Junction. And train services through Stevenage in Hertfordshire are suspended because of an incident. In London, the A11 is closed each way along the Broadway in Stratford because of an investigation causing delays. In Kent, the A21 is blocked at Lamberhurst because of a medical emergency. In East Sussex, the A27 is closed each way through the Southwick Tunnel. Overnight roadworks have overrun, causing long delays. And Penzance helicopter flights to and from the Isles of Scilly are cancelled because of poor weather conditions.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
This is Good Afternoon Britain. It is 40 minutes past 12 specifically. Now, the government has been urged to close the safeguarding gap after GB News revealed that a convicted grooming gang abuser was attempting to set up or to convert a property into a children's care home.
It's extraordinary, this story. Well, the deputy leader of Leeds Council has raised concerns that they have been open to legal challenge if they'd have rejected the application, because landlords are not subject to suitability checks during the planning process. Well, it's a little bit complicated, but let's break it down now with our national reporter, Charlie Peters, who, of course, brought us the original extraordinary story. Charlie.
So, if you're a manager of a children's care home, you need to register with Ofsted. If you are the provider of a children's care home, you need to register with Ofsted. You need to be subject to suitability checks. You need to see financial, mental, and that you're physically fit to carry out the duties of running a children's care home. But if you're the landlord who owns the property that's being converted into a children's care home, there are no checks whatsoever. So that has led to quite a lot of frustration in Leeds City Council, where this application that we revealed last month was going on because Abid Yunus, who was convicted in 2012 of sexually assaulting a child as part of a 12-strong grooming gang, did own a property and was in the process of having that property converted into a children's care home. Now, we've heard frustration from Jonathan Pryor, the deputy leader of Leeds City Council, who's written to Janet Davey, the government Minister for Children, Families and Wellbeing, urging her to close this safeguarding gap, urging her to change the rules on the back of this appalling application that we revealed last month to ensure that landlords are also subject to those suitability checks.
And why is there this safeguarding gap? Is it because the assumption is that if you just simply own the property that you won't have access in the way that would allow, you know, those children to be vulnerable to whoever owns the building?
Well, I've contacted Ofsted for comment on this, still waiting a response from them as to why landlords aren't subject to checks. It's possibly that that's the case, Emma, that landlords in some cases won't be involved in the day-to-day running of the operation. But clearly, there is a safeguarding risk if someone who owns the property has a conviction for abusing children in the context of running a children's care home. It almost beggars belief. In fact, Jonathan Pryor, speaking to me earlier this morning on the back of writing this letter to the government, he said that it is frankly absurd that the council could have been subject to a legal challenge if they had rejected this planning application outright. Because if they had rejected it, they would have done so without essentially a legitimate mechanism for doing so. As it stands, I mean, the property in Beeston, in a section of Leeds, is pretty impressive. It's got walls, it's got lots of fencing around it, it looks fairly secure. But of course, the person who owns it is anything but.
But the previous application was rejected because of parking.
No, it wasn't. No, the landlord, Abid Yunus, had several applications rejected for other issues with parking, but this one was still in the pipeline. It wasn't rejected at all.
So what I mean is that the previous, for a different purpose, the application was rejected because they didn't have sufficient parking or something to that effect. So now it seems absurd that they would have grounds to reject it on the basis of parking, but it could be illegitimate for the council to refuse on the basis of this guy's prior conviction.
Right, so I've seen a few of the complaints put into this particular property. None of them were about parking, they were all about the landlord. So in effect, all of the complaints were null and void. Just to be clear, all of the parking complaints are for completely separate properties. This application would have passed. It only failed because after pressure put onto it by GB News revealing the fact that the landlord was a child abuser, the care company removed their application under pressure and apologised that they were involved in it at all. That was Casa Care Services.
I mean, it is pretty extraordinary. Of course, a landlord, by definition, would have the keys to the property.
Precisely.
This property that looks secure, I wonder if we can get a picture of it back up. I mean, this looks secure. It's got big walls, a big gate. I mean, it would be a lovely, secure, safe place for children to go to in a safe environment. Unless, of course, the guy with a key to those big gates is a convicted sex offender, convicted of sexual activity with children as part of a grooming gang.
Yeah, and as it stands, land ownership is not a planning consideration, which is fine in most situations, but not when this man is involved. Abid Yunus on your screens now. That's why Jonathan Pryor said to us that clearly for situations like this, it is a ridiculous position, and that's why a change is needed. I should stress that when Castor Care Services were informed about this situation by GB News, they said they were completely unaware of Mr Abid Yunus's convictions, and there have been some reports in the last month that they are now attempting to sue him because perhaps he did not reveal the fact that he was a convicted child sex offender.
Awareness seems extraordinary in itself.
Indeed. Wasn't hard for me to find out about it.
Well, Charlie Peters, we're very lucky to have you here at GB News. Thanks indeed for joining us and talking through another twist and turn in this extraordinary story. We must say that a government spokesperson has responded to say that the government will do whatever it takes to keep children safe, and we are already taking swift action to reform children's social care through our landmark Children, Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Whilst it's not the role of the planning system to regulate who should run a children's home, there are strict safeguards in place to protect children, and we continue to keep the planning system under review to ensure it works appropriately.
Maybe not quite strict enough.
Well, the planning system seems to be the most restrictive and strict thing anywhere in the world if you want to do a legitimate thing to your property.
Except where common sense is involved.
There you go.
Anyway, now, if you are in search of some summer-winter sun, here is the forecast for some of the top European holiday destinations. We'll see you in a tick.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
If you're looking to escape the cold weather in the UK and find some winter sun, it will be fine in Spain this weekend, but rather unsettled through much of Italy and Greece, an area of low pressure, and the Burao wind for Croatia continues to blow very strong, particularly towards the north. Meanwhile, much more settled weather, above average temperatures and plenty of sunshine through the Balearics, Spain as well, but an area of rain is going to push into Portugal, and that's going to likely affect parts of the Canaries next few days.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 10 minutes to 1 o'clock. And we're going to zoom into a story that relates to policing, it relates to fun, and it relates to, well, frankly, how this country is going down the drains. Yes, the Metropolitan Police have objected to the planning application for a new jazz bar in Covent Garden. Why? Well, there are fears that the vulnerable clubgoers could become victims of crime. It's an extraordinary story. This
jazz club would be a 350-seater venue, so really good for the nightlife of London. I'd certainly go to it. In the basement of St Martin's Lane Hotel, would be open till 1 a.m. 7 days a week. But Scotland Yard has objected to the venue's bid to be allowed to stay open to serve alcohol until 1 a.m. because they believed that it could add to crime, disorder and public nuisance. Why? Because it might contribute victims to that crime, disorder and nuisance. So the Metropolitan Police, rather than dealing with the crime, want to restrict the liberties, fun and enjoyment of the potential victims.
I mean, this is an extraordinary story because the Met Police, in their submission to Westminster Council, say, well, these people could be victims of phone thefts. They could be victims of unlicensed taxis. Sort of the immediate response is, sorry, why is the police trying to stop people going out and having fun when instead the police should probably be spending its time and diverting the resources they're using to try and stop new businesses opening, instead to use those resources to go after the criminals?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, you'd think...
I mean, it's so bad for the nightlife economy. Nightlife has already suffered in London because of COVID restrictions, everything to do with the pandemic, the economy more generally. And now you have the Metropolitan Police interfering in order to prevent more venues from opening because those people might be a victim of crime. I mean, what message does that send to people who might come on holiday to London, to tourists, that don't come here because you might become a victim of crime? Because what this suggests is that Metropolitan Police have no faith in their ability to actually deal with crime. Instead, they just want to eliminate the victims.
Well, that's the Metropolitan Police's ideal London, right? No one leaving their homes, lockdown 2.0, no crime to police, no one walking around. But fundamentally, this story also shows how crime isn't just a social issue, it's an economic issue.
Yeah,
When you let crime run rampant, as we're seeing far too much, not just in London, but across the country, I mean, the amount of shoplifting that is going on, all the rest of it, you can see the economic impacts of that too. I mean, people being less able to open a new business, people being less able to contribute to all sorts of elements of the economy. I mean,
there's so much red tape anyway. If you wanted to open a small business in London, the rents are sky high anyway. But if you are also having to contend with the possibility that people might come and rob your shop, shoplifting, the amount of money that the economy must be losing to crime and to shoplifting, never mind the deterrent of people who don't want to come in because maybe they don't want to go shopping on Oxford Street because they don't want to get their phone snatched.
Yes.
So it's just really, it is, like you said, it's like the death knell of London, and the Metropolitan Police just seem to be adding to the problem.
Is there a police force anywhere else in the world? Sorry, a police service. We're not allowed to say force anymore. I think that's too officious.
Offensive. My pearls, Tom.
Is there a police force anywhere else in the world that tries to stop people engaging in economic activity because it would be too difficult to police?
I mean, it does seem, given what we've seen, the way the police have policed protests and things, they always focus on the potential victims rather than the criminals.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain. Don't go anywhere. We're going to be hearing live from the US Vice President J.D. Vance after this.
Despite the morning rain, it'll be a nice, warm, cosy day ahead. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Now, as we go into this weekend, we are going to see some wet weather pushing its way northeastwards, and as that is hitting against some relatively cold air, we're going to see a bit of snow, even a bit of freezing rain across some places. So that could cause some treacherous conditions. But through the rest of today, it's actually, well, not looking too bad across the eastern side of the country. Some clearer skies as we head towards the evening here. Further west and southwest, it's a cloudy, damp end to the day with some rain pushing its way through. The rain turning heavier across parts of the southwest overnight, and like I said, there will be some hill snow mixed in, even a bit of freezing rain as well. Some places will dip a bit below freezing where we get clear skies to start the night, but many places starting to turn milder from the west-southwest, with something a little bit milder pushing its way in as we go through into tomorrow. Otherwise, and first thing tomorrow morning, a few showers started around some eastern parts of Scotland, but also some wintriness over the higher ground here, so some sleet, some snow quite likely. Starting to see the back end of the rain across Northern Ireland, but nonetheless a damp start. Meanwhile, across parts of Northern England into Wales and southwest England, a wet start to the day, and across parts of Northern England in particular, here we have the greatest risk of some snow accumulations building up 2 to 5 centimetres above higher ground, and even some freezing rain leading to some pretty icy surfaces as we go through tomorrow. In the southeast, worth bearing in mind that the rain doesn't actually reach many places here, so staying largely dry, and in the southwest we'll have something brighter feeding in as we go into the afternoon, and with that, temperatures here getting just about into double figures. Elsewhere, despite the milder air that's coming through, because of the cloud, the rain, the sleet, the snow, it is going to stay a little bit on the chilly side. More cloudy, wet weather to come for many places, particularly across the central slice of the UK as we go through tomorrow evening, but like I say, some clearer skies towards the southwest. There may be something a little bit brighter for a time as we go into the beginning of next week, but rain not too far away towards the west.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're doubling your chances to win in our latest Great British giveaway, with 2 fabulous prize bundles up for grabs. There's 2 lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16, along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. And the best news is 2 lucky winners are going to win. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. 1 entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
And fashionistas are keen to see which new trends are set to hit the catwalk.
Well, our next guest is very well placed to share her predictions with us after being a contestant on hit ITV series Dress the Nation, as well as being an upcycling and sewing consultant.
Wow. Joining us now is Tendai Murewe. I want to go back to you appearing on the ITV Dress the Nation.
Right.
Tell us about that experience. What was that like?
Oh, that was one of my highlights as a upcycling consultant. I learned to sew in my kitchen 5 years ago. And then, during COVID, just making masks. Then the next thing I was on a Dress the Nation, making dresses in front of TV. Yeah, it was just incredible. I think we all had all these clothes that we have, but we don't know what to do with them. So mainly I started with men's jackets, taking off the sleeves and putting it like a print on.
I've tried this. I've tried taking off my sleeves before. I now have about 3 jackets with no sleeves. I never managed to put them back on.
You need to come to a workshop. You need to come to a workshop.
I need an upcycling consultant. 2025. What can we expect fashion-wise?
I think bold prints are back. People are loving. I think you walk on the streets in frollals and oversized men's jackets.
So the exact opposite. We have drastically underperformed this morning. You're just saying not like us.
We just woke up this morning and thought it's winter, it's cold, it's grey.
Grey, miserable.
Is that not the way to go?
No, it is. It's still, I think because fashion is expressive. It's whatever you want to express yourself. You know?
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Friday, the 14th of February. I'm Emma Trimble.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Now, the Munich Security Conference gets underway as Volodymyr Zelensky gears up for a crucial bilateral meeting with JD Vance. We'll be hearing from the US Vice President shortly, and we will bring it to you live here on Good Afternoon Britain.
Elsewhere, a third Labour MP has come under fire for running a WhatsApp group chat which branded veterans and pensioners as Nazis. It also featured an AI picture of Rishi Sunak being deported to Rwanda.
This comes as Rachel Reeves faces further scrutiny over her expenses and her CV. The Prime Minister backs his Chancellor, but has she lost your trust?
And it is, of course, Valentine's Day. Are you doing anything special to celebrate? Or, like me, are you sort of rocking backwards and forwards, crying gently into a wet... no, not a wet... Well, it's wet because of the tears. Do you know what? Let's just roll the titles. I did not know where I was going with that one. I just completely lost my way. Oh, goodness me.
That was a Tom Harwood special, that was.
It really was, yeah. I tried to conjure up some majestic imagery and all I did was just embarrass myself.
Dear.
Well.
That wasn't quite Shakespeare.
No.
Certainly wasn't.
Well, are you doing anything for Valentine's Day?
Yeah, should be going to dinner tonight.
Oh, that's lovely.
I think we've got some nice dinner plans planned. I say we, I mean my husband has made some nice dinner plans, so looking forward to that. Yeah.
Roses are red, violets are blue. Vodka costs less than a dinner for two.
Well, maybe I should just get some vodka on the way home, should I?
Well, what do you think's in my mug? I do think that Valentine's Day generally has become a bit of a sort of a bit of a ploy by various card manufacturing companies who shall remain nameless.
I think there's a nice middle ground. I think there's the over commercial side of it for sure. But then there's also just being sort of bar humbug, not going to do anything at all. So we're not doing Valentine's Day cards or any of that stuff.
Not
giving,
paper petals across the
none of that. But
house.
we will have a nice dinner. We'll have a nice dinner.
Okay, well, very good. If you're doing,
you're going to be crying, Tom.
Yeah,
right.
I'm in a sort of darkened room, rocking backwards and forwards, hugging a pillow.
Roses are red, violets are blue.
Coming up with better poetry than that. But what are you doing? gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved in the conversation and, of course, to get involved in all the stories we're discussing this hour. We're going to be live in Munich. We're going to be talking about the latest WhatsApp scandal in Westminster and the discovery of a prodigious reserve of gas in Lincolnshire. It's all to come in this programme after your very latest headlines with, of course, the one and only Sam Francis.
Tom, Emma, thank you very much, and good afternoon to you. Just coming up to 4 minutes past 1. Well, the top story this lunchtime, Sir Keir Starmer has said Britain is committed to Ukraine being on an irreversible path to joining NATO after the United States had appeared to rule it out. He made the pledge in a call with President Volodymyr Zelensky ahead of a major security summit in Munich today, where world leaders are set to discuss the ongoing war in Ukraine. It comes after Donald Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin and agreed to work very closely, they said, to end the conflict together, raising concerns in Europe. Ukraine's president, though, says Putin isn't preparing for peace, but to continue deceiving the world. Well, among the leaders joining that summit in Germany is Foreign Secretary David Lammy, and he's expected to meet with allies there, with Ukraine's future, of course, high on the agenda. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has spoken to US President Donald Trump. That conversation took place last night to discuss his upcoming visit to the United States. The call during a meeting with Trump's special envoy Mark Burnett at Downing Street comes after the president had announced plans to impose reciprocal tariffs on countries that charge VAT on US goods. And with £300 billion in UK-US trade at stake, ministers are hoping Britain could be exempt. The government, though, says it won't be overreacting to those latest tariff threats, with Senior Minister Pat McFadden insisting the government will wait and see what happens. But the British Chamber of Commerce is warning a trade war could drive up prices here at home and is urging the government to negotiate with the United States. The Vatican has confirmed that Pope Francis is being treated in hospital for tests and for bronchitis too. The 88-year-old has battled long bouts of the illness and was diagnosed again last week. Despite that, he's continued his duties indoors but has struggled with mobility and suffered 2 recent falls. He's being treated, having completed his audiences earlier this morning. In other news, an Indian man has been found guilty of raping and murdering Irish backpacker Danielle McLaughlin in Goa in 2017. Vikat Bhagat attacked the 28-year-old and her body was discovered in a field just the next day. Her family say justice has finally been achieved after an 8-year trial plagued by delays. Post-mortem found she died from brain damage and from strangulation. They are also now watching to see what further legal steps may follow. Rachel Reeves is under pressure over claims she used company expenses to buy gifts and also exaggerated her Bank of England experience. An investigation by the BBC found the Chancellor was among 3 staff accused of using expenses to fund a lifestyle. The broadcaster, though, says she left the Bank of England 9 months earlier than stated on her social media profile, and that is LinkedIn. She denies being investigated over expenses, though, and Sir Keir Starmer says he has no concerns about her conduct. But the Conservatives say the reports do raise serious questions for the Chancellor to answer. Bereaved families of terminally ill patients have urged MPs today to remember them as they debate assisted dying. In a letter, they say memories of their loved ones' deaths will haunt them for the rest of their lives, and also warn MPs their decisions could determine how terminally ill people spend their final moments. Well, it comes as Kim Leadbeater proposes replacing High Court oversight with a panel including psychiatrists and social workers, arguing it could strengthen protections. But opponents, including 5 Labour MPs, say the move would remove judicial safeguards and hand life or death decisions to civil servants. Conservative MP Danny Kruger is among those who claim the plan would mean approvals must be given if the patient meets a simple capacity test. Well, today is the day. It's Valentine's Day, and love is certainly in the air.
Love is in the air, everywhere I look around.
But so is spending. More than half of us are splashing the cash on our other halves this Valentine's Day, with men just edging out women in the romance stakes. A survey found dinner dates are the top choice, while others are sending cards, buying flowers, or even you might get a special getaway. Young love, though, comes with the biggest price tag. 65% of 18 to 34-year-olds are spending, compared to just 39% of those over the age of 55. And if you're in London, chances are you're feeling extra romantic. It's the most loved-up region, but the southwest is keeping things rather low-key. And take a look at this. It's a real-life whale of a tale. A kayaker's close encounter with a humpback whale. It went viral after being briefly trapped in the whale's mouth. Adrian Simancas was kayaking with his father when the creature surfaced and decided to take a quick, well, you could call it a nibble, but it looks certainly more serious than that. Del Simancas, just metres away, caught the jaw-dropping moment on video, urging his son to try and stay calm. Adrian said he thought he'd been eaten and swallowed up, but luckily the whale released him unharmed. That's the news on GB News. I'll be back with you in half an hour. Now that's over to Tom and Emma.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. It is now 9 minutes? Pin it on a board. It is now 9 minutes past 1.
Now, the future of Ukraine is top of the agenda as Foreign Secretary David Lammy meets US President JD Vance in Munich. Earlier this week, President Trump added doubt whether the USA would continue to support the war-stricken state when agreeing to hold talks with Vladimir Putin.
Well, let's look at live pictures here from Munich, where we're going to be hearing from the US President, the US Vice President. God, I'm going to hang myself by about 4 years there. The Vice President, JD Vance, will be speaking a little bit later. Here is one of the security entrances of the conference, where we have been seeing some people arrive over the course of the last few minutes. But let's get up to date now with the defence editor for the Evening Standard, Robert Fox, because, Robert, there has been a pretty concerning line from Ukrainian intelligence today suggesting Russia is preparing for a war with NATO.
That's been around for some time. I don't think it's imminent, but it's the kind of rhetoric both sides like, actually, but because Zelensky likes using it, very, very good at information war, saying, come on, NATO, you've got to help us because you're next. And been very, very effective at getting that across. And the Kremlin, particularly with people like Lavrov, the foreign minister, and Medvedev, former president and head of the Security Council, the deputy head of the Security Council, which is the inner court of Putin, likes to talk about NATO, and it's the threat from NATO and it's the encroachment from NATO that has brought this war about in Ukraine. Now, the fact that NATO seems to be embarrassed by its senior leader, President Trump, and Vice President Vance, plays really into Russia's hands. But NATO is on the table very, very much at the Munich Security Conference. What it will do, how much America is going to do in NATO for the defense of Europe, and how much America is prepared to put muscle behind its effort to get peace talks going with Ukraine. There will be a lot about peace talks over Ukraine, but I think it's a long way off before they come to any kind of fruition.
And Robert, of course, security is about more than just Russia. What should we be expecting, maybe in terms, from JD Vance's speech, but also in conversations behind closed doors at the security conference? What might we be expecting in terms of China? And of course, we've just seen that there's been this attack in Munich just before the conference as well. What might we be expecting from the kind of broader view of security from the United States perspective?
Well, I think one of the most interesting conversations is really going to be between JD Vance and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and the Secretary General, the newish Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, an extremely experienced Dutch Prime Minister and extremely well-versed, and he knows what's coming. And what's coming is this: pay up. Trump has been consistent about it. Europe doesn't pay enough for its defence, and you're really going to have to do it because we're not behind you in the way that have been in the past. You've got to spend more on defence. This is even getting through to Sir Keir Starmer and, above all, Rachel Reeves. And it's going to there will be a focus behind the scenes on China, because that's where America sees its main threat and its main effort. And it says it cannot handle two really big war theatres, potential war theatres, namely the Far East and Europe at the same time.
And yet, doesn't this just expose the utter impotence of Europe? Europe is but the tail of the American dog on this issue, because no European country pays anywhere close to the amount that the Americans put forward for their armed forces. I mean, they're close to they're hundreds of billions. I think it's $750 billion per year on the US military. We pay around £50 billion for ours. It's just nowhere near in comparison.
Let's put a bit of flesh on that. It's actually well over 800 billion. It's well over $750 billion. It's quite a small. It's not that spectacularly in terms of percentages of GDP, which they keep talking about. Britain still spends about 55, heading towards 60 billion within a year or two. And there have been pleasures about upgrading and perhaps going to the new target of 2.5% of GDP. Both the Conservatives going into the election and Labour have mentioned it, and they have got nowhere near it. The British Armed Forces, which are really rather critical, are in a critical state, and they are in urgent need of reform. And there's a first-class row going on, even as we speak, about the Strategic Defence Review, which is due out by the end of this month. I think it'll be delayed, because it is dawning on them that the Americans are serious. They want Britain to take more of a leading role, and they want Britain's armed forces, or the threat of the use of force and the deployment of force, to be more realistic and more practical, because, to use the horrible old phrase, they are very, very hollowed out, particularly after the experience over the past decades in Iraq and Afghanistan.
And Robert, there's a broader context of broader political, diplomatic context to this as well. How important is our armed forces and our defence spending, aside from NATO, in the UK? How important is that for our relationship with America during the Trump presidency?
It's absolutely vital, and we haven't had a very good bill of health, have we, up to now? A former national security advisor to Trump in his first administration, H.R. McMaster, a general, and he is something of an Anglophile. He's very pro the Brits. He said, looking at the capability of British armed forces, he used words very close to saying he was just embarrassed. There has been a decade of neglect, and let's be quite frank, neither political parties have regarded defence as old-fashioned and not a priority. But the trouble is that the sense of threat is so complex now, particularly from cyber, particularly on communications, particularly on sea traffic, carrying food, fuel, and communications, that it's real. And I think that the critique is absolutely right. The message from the military leadership, which is very thoughtful about this, I'm talking about in the UK, is really trying to say privately to the politicians, get real, because they're really, you ask for our expertise, and there is a real threat scenario, precisely in the areas that we've been discussing in this conversation, not only from Europe, but also, as we've seen with sea communications, which we've seen with the Houthis in the Red Sea, where Britain is very committed and very dependent on global maritime trade, and we can't duck out of that one.
OK, well, Robert Fox, defence editor of the Evening Standard, thanks so much for joining us, as, of course, we await that speech from the US Vice President J.D. Vance. I wonder if we can just have a look back at his arrival in Munich. It's quite a dramatic scene with the snow, but there's something that I noticed about this. I mean, J.D. Vance always travels with his kids.
Isn't it
and
wonderful?
His whole family. And I just couldn't help but watch this video and just think, what a lovely picture of sort of the in-show parenting that we actually don't see that much from political leaders.
And it's not just J.D. Vance, it's also Elon Musk.
Yes.
Donald Trump has been pictured with his grandchildren. They're really bringing
this,
the
of course,
family onto
Mark
the world
Rutte,
stage.
not a child of J.D. Vance. So they grow up so fast. But no, it is such an interesting point, because we saw Elon Musk with little X on his shoulders in the Oval Office. Actually, and I think there's something here about male politicians, specifically in America right now, on the right, sort of showing fatherhood in much more of a prevalent way than perhaps we've seen in recent years.
I think, I mean, it's also quite extraordinary to see these children on the world stage at events like the inauguration parade, where you could see the very small children in the background, a very normal family coming off of the plane in their pyjamas. And it's not just humanising. I think it's sort of... It's elevating ordinary families into world affairs. I mean, there's a perfect example there of little X sitting on the floor of the Oval Office. And actually, in times gone by, presidents did have a lot of photographs taken with, you know, there's a great photograph of a child peeping from underneath the desk.
JFK, yes.
Yeah.
There's a famous one of JFK and one of his nephews, I think.
I think we could do with more of that in British politics, I think.
So often we talk about the need for sort of positive role models for young men, and so many times when it's young men that go the wrong way in life, you know, fatherless households, all the rest of it. But actually, frankly, what about the role models for the fathers? and showing that it's actually, you know, it's normal, it's okay to sort of, you know, bring your kid into work.
Well, it's normalising family life in a professional context, which I think is great, because a lot of people think they can't have professional success and have a family, and this sends the opposite message.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, so it's a really important point of discussion. What do you think about it? gbnews.com/your say is the way to get involved in that discussion, and indeed all the others we're having today. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and do stay with us, plenty more coming. The Prime Minister maintains his trust in his Chancellor, but has Rachel Reeves lost your trust following the scandals surrounding her expenses and her CV? Stay with us here on Good Afternoon Britain. We'll be back after this.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is 23 minutes past 1. Now, the Chancellor is under increased pressure to come clean about her previous employment.
Yes, a BBC investigation claims that whilst she was working at HBOS, Halifax Bank of Scotland, she was also investigated over her use of business expenses and allegations she used company money to buy everything from handbags to perfumes, earrings and wine for senior colleagues.
Rachel Reeves' online CV also exaggerated the length of time that she worked for the Bank of England.
Well, joining us now with the details is our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, this is a tricky one for the Chancellor.
It does. It predates before she became an MP. There are two things at play here. The obvious one is she's reset her LinkedIn online CV twice in 3 months. That's embarrassing. First time to make clear what she did at the Halifax Bank of Scotland, whether she's an economist or not, and was she really in customer service or a different role there. And the second point she did this week in response to a 3-month BBC investigation, she shortened the time she was at the Bank of England, the big job of her career before she became Chancellor. She has said in the past up to 10 years at the bank. In fact, it was 5.5 years, in fact, and they took 9 months off that the timeline this week. So why are you doing that? Well, we don't know. That shows a degree of casualness about your career, which I would argue most people wouldn't have. If I worked at the Bank of England, I would know when I started and when I left, and I'm quite proud of that period. She's blaming a member of her team, which also I think is questionable, but I think most politicians just own the mistakes. They don't publicly blame a member of the team for a difficult position they're in. That's the CV side of it. There's also her expenses. Less clear here. The BBC say there were 3 individuals who were investigated for the way she used what was called a credit card to boost morale amongst the staff, and things were bought, all sorts of things like handbags, perfume, earrings to boost the morale of key staff.
But the question is, did it boost the morale of one Rachel Reeves?
Yes.
Not her subordinates, but herself.
That's right. And the BBC say there was an investigation into how that card was used. Rachel Reeves said she had no idea there was an investigation. She said all the expenses were signed off in good order. But it's questionable what happened here.
And just very quickly before we move on to assisted dying, we had a Labour councillor on earlier who said that because LinkedIn is not really your CV, it's kind of like social media, that it's not as significant to have been a bit sloppy about the details.
Yeah, I'm not sure. If you're a public figure, I mean, my daughter did my LinkedIn recently because it was all over the place, but I'm not really a public figure. I thought it was interesting to have it up to date.
You
correct.
are a public figure.
No, I'm not. No, I'm not, Tom. But I think
national treasure.
I think if you're, thank you. You are both too. But if you are Rachel Reeves, you want to have it all correct. Particularly having rewritten it last November, it shows a casualness about detail. Why detail matters is Margaret Thatcher talked about how she kept all her finances. The household budgeting was done correctly, and that was applied across the whole country. That's why I think detail matters in the Chancellor.
Yeah. Right, OK, let's move on to one of the big topics on your podcast this week. It's been sort of rumbling along for, well, months now. The passage of the assisted dying bill, what some people refer to as assisted suicide, this issue in the House of Commons is incredibly finely balanced.
This is as epoch-defining as the abortion legislation back in the 60s. It will legally allow people to go and see medical professionals and go through various checks and then end their lives early. That is a big moment for us, a Rubicon we're crossing as a country. It's been debated in the House of Commons this week. MPs are in charge, the government is neutral, and that means we haven't got really an estimate on the scale of what might happen, but we're trying to get to it on GB News. And I spoke to Nikki DaCosta, the former head of legislative affairs in No. 10 Downing Street, and she told me this on Chopper's Political Podcast.
I always believe that when my choices can only go so far until they impose on somebody else and where they might cause harm to somebody else, then Parliament needs to be really careful about how it legislates.
Are there estimates on how many people might use this process? That'd be interesting to find out.
It is, and what we see over time is it grows. I think we are looking in the thousands at the moment. I'm actually looking into this in detail, but I think we would be looking maybe at about 5,000 people a year. It's quite substantial.
Nikki DaCosta, they're quite substantial. Now, she's an opponent of the legislation, Tom and Emma, but a supporter is called Neil Shastri-Hurst, a Tory MP, a surgeon who has dealt with people at the end of their lives. He also thinks 5,000 to 6,000 might end their lives early. But he supports the legislation because he's been with people at the end of their time, and it made a profound effect on him. And here's what Neil Shastri-Hurst had to say on the same podcast.
There aren't many doctors like yourself, are there, in Parliament with experience of the actual people being affected by the legislation, are there?
There's more doctors than you think. I mean, I can think of a couple on 2 or 3 on the Labour side. There's about 4 on our side, 4 or 5 on our side. So I think Parliament benefits from having that experience.
Yeah.
I bring the additional aspect of being a lawyer as well, who did healthcare law. So,
oh, right.
I've got a certain degree of understanding from both the legal aspect and from the medical aspect.
Yes.
Thankfully, bringing the theoretical side of it, but also the practical.
And as I say, just finally on this, you've been with people at the end of their time, and they have said to you, "Can you make it end quicker?" Have they?
Yeah.
How do you speak? You say, "I can't." Legally, I can't.
I can't. I can make you as comfortable as possible, but it's difficult. It is difficult, and there are certain patients that stay with you, and there is a graveyard in my mind of those that I felt I let down.
Yeah, because you couldn't.
Because I couldn't. I could do the best I could, but that didn't necessarily stop their suffering.
And I can see you're moved by that. That's stays with you. That
it does stay with you. I think most doctors, in fact, I think all doctors will have those patients that really.
There you have it, a graveyard in his mind, he said there, very poignantly. He has been with people at the end of their lives. He couldn't ease their suffering, which could have been down this route. That's why he backs assisted dying, making it legal. But there's all sorts of concerns now. Amendments happening, the protections that MPs voted on have been removed. There's no longer a judge in charge of signing off what two doctors say, but a panel. There's someone overseeing that panel who's now been called a death czar by critics. I just wonder why the government, Tom and Emmett, aren't gripping this and saying, right, here's our estimate. We don't even know if you have to pay for it. Is it a free service? We don't even know that properly.
This is perhaps the most murky thing about this bill in Parliament, whatever your view on this. And I think I've spoken to a lot of parliamentarians about this who are deeply, deeply torn on the moral side, on the empathetic side of things. I mean, it is a difficult and thorny issue, but it's one that the government seems to be playing behind the scenes. I mean, there's a lot of speculation that this is, in fact, a government bill that they've put on one backbencher to say this is your private member's bill, but actually it's number 10 behind all
and
of this.
Accused of not having all of the evidence properly discussed and debated in those sessions.
Will you have to pay for it? Will it be only open to middle-class, well-off people to pay 5,000 quid to do it, or will it be on the NHS? What will that put a drain on resources on the NHS?
And presumably, aside from the issue of, various concerns about whether, as you've seen in other countries that have this kind of legislation, like in Canada, where you have people who are applying for assisted dying because of poverty, because of mental illness, and it becomes this very slippery slope. But aside from that, you also have this problem where doctors would be effectively required to do something that might be against their own conscience. And there have been many doctors who have been coming out and feel that they're not being listened to, who have been coming out and saying, I will not kill my patients. And they don't, in disagreement with
Neil Shastri Hirsch,
would say, quite on the contrary, that it isn't the compassionate thing to kill your patient, that actually it's more about palliative care. Yes,
and I think maybe that's where Strickland comes from. He's the Health Secretary, he's against the plans. Shabana Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, she's against the plans. We have a patchy palliative care map in this country, and if you live in an area where there's poor palliative care, are the death rates higher? I mean, it's a big thing to accuse the NHS of.
Interestingly, both Wes Streeting and Shabana Mahmood, religious members of the cabinet. Keir Starmer, who supports this move, or at least has in the past, the first atheist prime minister, the first openly atheist. I wonder how much theism and atheism actually come into this debate.
I first came across Keir Starmer when I was at the Telegraph as the Home Affairs editor. He was the DPP, and he was developing policies to stop the CPS prosecuting families who took their family members to Dignitas. So I helped him guide him to the paper with op-eds. And I think assisted dying is his first tiptoeing into politics, and that's why it matters to him. And the suggestion, as you say, he said he's in favour of it. We've got this Kim Leadbeater in charge of it. How much did this number 10 do? Number 10 have asked Kim Leadbeater to do this and almost backed away, leaving her to sort of shoulder this pressure to do it right.
A bit of a poison chalice.
Well, I think
you do have to ask whether or not the NHS could be trusted with this kind of power.
I just wonder whether this was the week when the mood changed against this legislation, with the changes we're seeing from the second reading vote now this week, and also the Sun newspaper saying, really? Is this the way of doing it? I just wonder whether it's changing.
Well, we can catch those conversations on Chopper's Political Podcast, available, of course, wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, now this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up on today's show. We'll be hearing from US Vice President JD Vance, but first, it's Sam Francis with your headlines.
Very good afternoon to you. Just after 1:30, the top story this lunchtime. Sir Keir Starmer says Britain is committed to Ukraine being on an irreversible path to joining NATO after the United States had appeared to rule it out. He made that pledge in a call with President Zelensky ahead of today's major security summit in Munich, where world leaders will discuss the war. It comes after Donald Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin and agreed to work very closely to end the conflict, raising concerns in Europe. Ukraine's president, though, says Putin isn't preparing for peace, but to continue deceiving the world. Well, meanwhile, Foreign Secretary David Lammy is among those meeting in Germany today, with Ukraine's future high on the political agenda. The Prime Minister has also spoken to US President Donald Trump last night to discuss his upcoming visit to the United States. The conversation took place during a meeting with Trump's special envoy, Mark Bernard, at Downing Street. It comes after the president announced plans to impose reciprocal tariffs on countries that charge VAT on US goods. And with £300 billion in UK-US trade at stake, ministers here hope Britain could be exempt. But the government says it won't be overreacting to Donald Trump's latest threat of tariffs, with Senior Minister Pat McFadden insisting they will wait to see what happens. But the British Chamber of Commerce is warning trade wars could drive up prices and are urging the government to negotiate with the US. Well, just some breaking news into us in the last few minutes from Cambridge. A 70-year-old man has been jailed for life for the 2013 murder of retired postmistress Una Crown. That's after DNA breakthroughs linked him to the crime. David Newton was convicted following the discovery of DNA on nail clippings. The 86-year-old widow was found in her home with a slashed throat and stab wounds in 2013, but the police initially failed to secure the crime scene properly, leading to crucial delays. Newton, the 70-year-old man now found guilty, had been a suspect from the start of the investigation, but it wasn't until 2023 that, as I say, advanced DNA testing led to his arrest. The jury found him today guilty after a month-long trial, and his sentence includes a minimum of 21 years behind bars. Also in the news today, Pope Francis is being treated in hospital for bronchitis. That's according to the Vatican. The 88-year-old has battled long bouts of the illness and was diagnosed again last week. Despite that, though, he has continued his duties indoors, but has struggled with mobility and suffered 2 recent falls. He'll be treated after completing audiences earlier today. And no, it's not just Tom and Emma. Love is in the air everywhere.
Love is in the air, everywhere I look around.
But so is spending. Apparently, more than half of us are splashing the cash on our other half this Valentine's Day, with men just edging out women in the romance stakes. A survey has found dinner dates are top of the list. Others of us sending cards, buying flowers, or even booking a getaway. Young love, though, comes with the biggest price tag. 65% of 18 to 34-year-olds are spending, compared to just 39% of the miserable over 55s. And if you're in London, chances are you're feeling extra romantic. It's been tipped the most loved-up region in the UK. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you in around half an hour. After this, Tom and Emma will be back with you.
Hello, it's time for your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Now, some of us will see a few sunny breaks today. In fact, some places will have some prolonged sunshine, but for most, largely cloudy, and we have some wet weather coming in from the southwest. That's in association with a frontal system that's gradually making its way northeastwards, and worth bearing in mind that this is going to hit against some relatively cold air. As a result, we could see something a bit wintry, particularly over the high ground of Wales, maybe Northern Ireland as well. Some sleet, some snow, perhaps even a little bit of freezing rain, but for most towards the west-southwest, it's just going to be outbreaks of rain. Like I said, some sunshine further east, but temperatures still a bit below average. Most places only getting to highs in the mid-single figures, something a bit milder trying to come in from the west. So across parts of Wales, southwest England, a bit of a cloudy, damp end to the day. The rain doesn't look especially heavy for the time being, but it is going to pep up a bit as we go overnight. Some heavier bursts perhaps across Northern Ireland, but further north and east, a drier end to the day and some clearer skies to start the night across parts of Scotland and northeast England. And so here temperatures are going to take a little bit of a dip. An early frost is quite likely for some places here. Otherwise, through the night then we are going to see that rain gradually making its way northeastwards and, as I mentioned, hitting against this colder air. So some snow likely over modest higher ground of parts of Scotland and northern England, and even the potential for some freezing rain. Remember, freezing rain gives some very treacherous icy conditions, so do watch out for that early tomorrow morning. Otherwise, temperatures a little bit on the low side.
At 39 minutes past 1, we're going straight to Munich, where the Vice President of America is speaking.
We're, of course, thrilled to be here. We're happy to be here. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And, you know, it's great to be back in Germany. As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of us who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples, to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, you know, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even as, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we will certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but we gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security. And normally, we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense, the threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build, As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with. Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when people represent, when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or, even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we're defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, Almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course, it's gotten much higher since. And we know the situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk. But what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless you.
Well, we're still looking at the US Vice President J.D. Vance walking out of the Munich Security Conference stage there after what can only be described as an astonishing speech that shocked the hall in Munich and no doubt will send reaction ripples throughout Europe.
I mean, the tone of that speech is just the most extraordinary speech of its kind that I have ever seen. Even if you think back to, David Cameron's speech at the Munich Security Conference where he talked about extremism and so on, the fact that, J.D. Vance is focusing on how the biggest threat we face is the threat to our own fundamental internal values. What he said there also, I mean, it's almost like the adult is in the room giving the children a telling off when he cited Pope John Paul II there at the end, saying that we must not be afraid of our people. He's really holding them to account and asking them to trust the views of the people, to be accountable to their electorates, and saying, actually, far from what many people might have expected, which might have been a focus on, GDP, how much of GDP we're spending on defence, on our militaries. Instead, he focused on the biggest threat coming from our fundamental values, that internal threat, and particularly on issues of censorship, free speech, and mentioning even specifically the burning of the Quran there. I mean, really just extraordinary.
Absolutely. There was only one mention of China and of Russia, just one mention each at the very start, saying it's all very well and good talking about who we defend from, and asking instead who we defend for. What do we defend for? And so the whole speech, whilst everyone at this conference has been speaking about external threats and big power interstate conflict, this speech barely mentioned it, and instead was a philosophical appraisal of where Europe is as a continent. He said most concerningly in the UK, most concerningly in the eyes of the US presidential administration in the UK, the people arrested for praying outside abortion clinics, the suggestion that in Scotland you may be arrested for praying inside your own home if that falls within one of these super abortion buffer zones that they're introducing as a result of a green piece of legislation in the Scottish Parliament. But also talking about how a former European commissioner has suggested perhaps annulling the result of the German election if the Germans vote the wrong way, no doubt referring there to the Alternative for Deutschland party. But J.D. Vance there saying the electorate don't get it wrong, and that the elite should stop saying that people are voting the wrong way and instead start responding to the concerns that people have.
And also extraordinary, how clear he was in his remarks about mass migration, saying that people haven't voted for this mass migration. In fact, they've voted against it, and talk of defending our shared civilization. He said something to the effect of how many times must we suffer attacks like this attack in Munich before we change course and defend our shared civilization, and urged people to recognise that people just care about their homes. And he said, and that the electorate are smart. So he really is doubling down on those fundamental democratic principles, citing that famous quote that relating to freedom of speech and defending people's right to say what they believe, even if you don't agree with them. And I thought what was so extraordinary and actually uplifting and so unusual for a Munich Security Conference was this remark that he made about the importance, as you said, Tom, not just of talking about what you're defending against, but what you're defending. And he made explicit reference to a shared positive positive vision. And that, in the European context, is something that is so rare to hear a politician say. It's sort of a bit of that kind of Trumpian fever dropping down in the midst of Europe. And there's something almost, it's no surprise that I am a fan of J.D. Vance, and regular viewers of the channel will know that. But it's almost like you can breathe. You think this is laying out a positive vision that sees security in a broader cultural context.
Although, of course, there will have been many leaders there who are thinking, my goodness me, this is the linchpin of NATO, supposed to be the big ally of all these European countries, coming in and saying, and not doing a big speech about the bad guys, the axis of evil, the Russias, the Chinas, the North Koreas, the Irans, instead talking about the Germanys, the Swedens, the Scotlands, the Englands, the UK, all of these things. These, if anything, were the baddies in his speech. That'll be deeply unsettling for European governments of many different flavours, a deeply unsettling speech for people that are relying on the American relationship.
But what's also interesting and quite characteristic, I think, of this new administration's general tone is that it whilst being reprimanding, was also amicable. He's offering America to Europe and America's offer to Europe as a critical friend. And I think it's very interesting to talk also about the sort of harder side of things in terms of spending on military hardware and so on. And he did mention the fact that he believes that to be a good ally to America, that Europe does need to sort of pull its socks up while America focuses on those places like Russia, Ukraine, China. He put that in the context of essentially Europe needing to get its house in order to decide how that money needs to be spent.
On culture as much as on hard cash or military. I mean, very little about the military in there. But I think just to round this conversation off, really pertinent. I was sitting here at this desk on New Year's Day, as we had planned a big show on lots of different sort of New Year's things. We spent the entire show talking about a New Orleans terror attack by an Al-Qaeda terrorist. We spent the entire show talking about people, including a Brit, who were killed by an Islamist terrorist. And then just yesterday, a ramming of a car in Munich, an Afghan asylum seeker in his 20s, known to police, as J.D. Vance said. And it is a pertinent question. How many times are we seeing this in Western societies? Cars running into revellers, party-goers, people going about their days. And how many times are we seeing this same story on repeat? We'll get to that question and so many more raised by a bombastic speech by the US Vice President after your latest headlines with Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon to you. It's 5 minutes past 2. A recap then on that top story we've just been hearing from Tom and Emma, that the US Vice President J.D. Vance has addressed the Munich Security Conference in the last few minutes, responding to Volodymyr Zelensky's concerns over a lack of a ready US plan to help end the war in Ukraine. It comes after Donald Trump spoke with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, agreeing together to work very closely to end the conflict, raising concerns in Europe. Ukraine's president says Putin, though, isn't preparing for peace, but to continue deceiving the world, and insists any peace deal must guarantee Ukraine's independence. Well, J.D. Vance also praised Munich's hospitality, despite the city reeling from yesterday's car attack that left more than 30 injured, some of them seriously. The 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker responsible has been arrested and is due in court today. Vance also warned that the biggest threat facing the West is not external, but he says the threat from within. And staying with international news, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has spoken to President Donald Trump. That conversation took place last night to discuss his upcoming visit to the United States. It was during a meeting with Trump's special envoy, Mark Burnett, at Downing Street. And it comes after the president announced plans to impose reciprocal tariffs on countries that charge VAT on US goods. With £300 billion in UK-US trade at stake, ministers here hope Britain could be exempt. But the government says it won't overreact to the latest threats of tariffs, with Senior Minister Pat McFadden insisting that the government will wait and see what happens. The British Chamber of Commerce, though, warns a trade war could drive up prices, urging the government to negotiate with the United States. Pope Francis is being admitted to hospital today for tests and treatment for bronchitis, the Vatican has confirmed. The 88-year-old has battled long bouts of the illness and was diagnosed again last week. Despite that, he's continued his duties indoors but has struggled with mobility and suffered 2 recent falls. He'll be treated today, having completed his audiences this morning. An Indian man has been found guilty of raping and murdering Irish backpacker Danielle McLaughlin in Goa in 2017. Vikat Bhagat attacked the 28-year-old and her body was discovered in a field the next day. Her family say justice has finally been achieved after an 8-year trial plagued by delays. A post-mortem found she died from brain damage and strangulation. The family say they're now watching to see what further legal steps will follow. Back here at home, Rachel Reeves is under pressure over claims she used company expenses to buy gifts and exaggerated her Bank of England experience. An investigation by the BBC found the Chancellor was among 3 staff accused of using expenses to fund a lifestyle. The broadcaster also says she left the Bank of England 9 months earlier than she stated on her LinkedIn profile. She denies being investigated over expenses, though, and Sir Keir Starmer says he has no concerns about her conduct. The Tories say the reports raise serious questions. Bereaved families of terminally ill patients have urged MPs today to remember them as they debate assisted dying. In a letter, they say memories of their loved ones' deaths will haunt them for the rest of their lives, and are warning MPs their decisions could determine how terminally ill people spend their final moments. It comes as Kim Leadbeater has proposed replacing High Court oversight with a panel instead, including psychiatrists and social workers. She argues it would strengthen protections. But opponents, including 5 Labour MPs, say the move would remove judicial safeguards and hand life or death decisions to civil servants. Well, today is the day. Love is in the air.
Love is in the air. Everywhere I look around.
But so is spending. More than half of us are splashing out on our other half this Valentine's Day, with men just edging out women in the romance stakes. A survey also found dinner dates are the top choice for couples. But young love comes with the biggest price tag. 65% of 18 to 34-year-olds are set to spend. And if you're in London, chances are you're feeling extra romantic. It's been dubbed the most loved-up region in the UK. And it's a real-life whale of a tale. Take a look at this. A kayaker's close encounter with a humpback whale went viral after he was briefly trapped in the whale's mouth. Adrian Simancas was kayaking with his father when the creature surfaced and decided to take a quick nibble of his yellow kayak. Del Simancas, just metres away, caught the jaw-dropping moment on video and urged his son to, well, try and stay calm. Easier said than done. Adrian said he thought he'd been eaten and swallowed. Luckily, he was unharmed. Those are the latest headlines for now. I'll be back with you in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 11 minutes past 2, and we've got to take a breath. Step back for a second, because the lid has just been blown off the Munich Security Conference. The US Vice President J.D. Vance has changed the topic of conversation. He barely mentioned Ukraine and instead delivered a speech on European migration and free speech policy.
In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat.
Well, we're going to get instant reaction now with the Ukrainian Member of Parliament, Kira Rudik, because, Kira, there was so much to cover in this speech, but perhaps the elephant in the room was the almost ignoring of the issue of Ukraine. What's your response?
Well, hello, Tom, and hello, Emma. Thank you so much for having me. I think J.D. Vance did not mention Ukraine because there are so many things and talks going on right now that perhaps he didn't feel to add to that. Just 2 days ago, we have heard the statement of of Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, who said that Ukraine is not going to join NATO. Then we have heard J.D. Vance himself saying Ukraine may join NATO, and this is not out of the picture. There is a special envoy, Keith Kellogg, with whom President Zelensky office had a meeting today at Munich Security Conference. And there are many things going on. The thing that we know for sure, right now, there is no offer at the table just yet. And we know that there is not a solution to the most basic and important problem is what are the security guarantees for any kind of the deal that is coming on. And there is no answer. And without that, it's very hard to talk about any details, right? Because as we spoke many times, we know that we have been in this ceasefire agreement with Putin since 2014. We know that Russia had no intention to honor this deal. So what would change their mind, right? Like, why would this time it be different? This is why there were so many discussions about Ukraine joining NATO, and this is our wish. And we were very clear about that, at least for the territories that are right now controlled by Ukraine, because this is the best security guarantee that we can find out and we can agree on. So let's see how the talks go on. There will be more and more statements, but I think there is one event that was not been taken by the news, or however it should be. Tom, this night there was a drone attack on Chernobyl sarcophagus. And we all know what this means.
The nuclear power plant.
Yes, this is a nuclear power plant that was protected by the sarcophagus after the explosion by the international community. And the attack on the nuclear plant of this scale is absolutely 100% a threat, not only to Ukraine, but to the whole Europe, because we know one thing about radiation: it doesn't care if you're in NATO or not and which passport you are holding. And this is dangerous. And the fact that right now Ukraine cannot protect itself against the attacks like this should be something that worrying many of our allies, because Russia has proven by many of their actions that they don't care what's going to happen with nuclear stations. And we have seen this with the largest station in Europe, Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant. And right now we see this with Chernobyl. This is truly dangerous, and this needs to take people's minds and cautious on. And we are warning everyone that we are not at the capacity to protect against the attacks like that.
As we saw that J.D. Vance didn't focus as much as everybody expected he would on Ukraine, what would the feeling of the Ukrainian people be seeing that that wasn't the focus of his speech? And you mentioned those closed-door meetings that will be taking place in Munich. What is the best case scenario that the Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian people will be hoping for out of these meetings with the US Vice President?
Well, first, I like J.D. Vance's speech, right? Because it was calling for what we have been calling for in Ukraine, for European leaders to wake up and acknowledge that the world has changed and the Europe needs to come stronger in this new reality that is going on. And beforehand, what we have seen were lots of prolonged discussions and not too many actions. This is why I think for Ukraine, the speech was very good, because it was calling for everyone to really open their eyes, wake up, and start making the decisions that are good for the people. And security is very good for the people. You know, honestly, Emma, for the last 3 days, there has been so many news in Ukraine from Donald Trump and his team that I'm a little bit relieved that we are continuing on the tracks that have been discussed before, rather than having any more drastic news. Well, the best thing that Ukraine expects to be on the table is, as I said, security guarantees for us, that Russia would not attack us again, and then for the future we will be protected. This is the key and the most important thing. Without that, there is no discussion, there is no deal, because we don't see what we are getting through that. What I'm very concerned of is about the statements that we have heard from different leaders saying Ukraine needs to give up this and that, and we never heard what's Russia giving up on their ability to kill us every single night and to continue raping and destructions. So that is the question that needs to be answered really soon.
Well, Kira Rudik, Ukrainian Member of Parliament, always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks so much for coming on and putting across your case. We're going to get more live reaction now from the former Labour spokesperson, James Matthewson. Of course, listen to this speech which, let's not beat around the bush. JD Vance there, the Vice President of the most powerful nation in the world, said most concerningly, he used that phrase, most concerningly in his speech, about the free speech situation in the United Kingdom. He referenced people arrested in this country for silent prayer. This is a pretty bad blot for the UK government.
I don't think so. I think it's a bad reflection on JD Vance and on the US administration. What an absolute disgrace that in a time that we needed and had an opportunity for the vice president, well, supposedly the vice president, we all know who the real vice president is at the moment, the US, but he's come here with an opportunity to show support for a country that was illegally invaded by Russia. Russia, the historic enemy of America and a real enemy of free speech. You know, the amount of people detained in Russia and murdered political opponents, people who were exercising their own freedom of speech. And JD Vance chooses to attack the UK.
But James, we were just listening to a Ukrainian MP there saying actually that she was pleased with JD Vance's speech because although the focus of the speech wasn't explicitly on Ukraine, the implications of what JD Vance were saying for Europe in bolstering Europe's security and defence, in making Europe stronger to defend against threats, have positive implications on the security of Ukraine.
You can certainly read it that way, and there will be, you know, as a result of this, hopefully Europe does stand up and say, okay, well, if we can't rely on America any longer, then we will we'll plug that gap ourselves, which I hope does happen. But obviously she's got her own politics as well that affect her judgment on the things she's been saying. However, as somebody in the UK, and you know, anybody who believes in the UK and supports the UK, should be really, you know, a bit kind of put out by these comments by JD Vance, because that's not the way an ally talks about another ally, and it's bringing politics to the table where we should have universal support across our allies and support across, especially when it comes to you know, issues like the NATO border and issues of defence. And yet all we're seeing is talk about culture wars.
Hang on. The UK does the FCDO, the Foreign Development and Commonwealth Office, has a mission around the world to promote British values. We go to countries that used to be described as third world, now we describe them as sort of less economically developed countries, and we try and promote the values of democracy, of free speech, of women's rights, of all of these things. Why is that okay for us to go to many sub-Saharan African countries and say this is how you should treat your people? There are some certain fundamental rights that really you should be adhering to if we're going to interact with you and give you aid and all the rest of it. Why shouldn't the United States of America do exactly the same thing, come across to Europe and say, actually, if you want your aid, if you want your military support, stop arresting your people for speech acts. We as Americans, with our First Amendment, think of this as absolutely extraordinary and against the values of any free society.
Because the question is values, Tom, and you raise it rightly there. And it's who represents whose values. Does JD Vance represent America's values? He's been democratically elected as the vice president, as is Donald Trump, through their process. But I do not believe that man represents... I don't believe he even represents his own values. You've had the Pope in recent days, the Pope, the head of the Catholic Church, of which JD Vance is a member, criticise JD Vance and say that he is not acting on Catholic values when it comes to the deportation of people. We are seeing a complete shift of values in the United States of America, the blaming of minority groups of people for the issues of billionaires. And you've got billionaires. We couldn't be further away from democracy when you've got a billionaire stood above the president in the Oval Office calling the shots, you know, without any kind of scrutiny, without any kind of transparency, whilst JD Vance, you know, the real vice president who was on the ticket, is sent to Europe to parrot these lines about culture wars and arrests in Britain, which all lie on misinformation spread on Twitter by Elon Musk about there being some police state in Britain where you're arrested for saying anything at all. It's simply not true. It's false. And it's a real
man was
danger.
arrested in Manchester after he burned a Quran. Not anyone else's Quran, his Quran that he owned. Why should he not be able to burn a Quran?
Because you're burning books. Burning books is a
that
very
you
dangerous
own.
practice.
Burning your own property is your right as a freeborn Englishman.
Wow. Okay. What were the Nuremberg burning book rallies? I mean, were they great? Were they legal? They were legal at the time in Germany. Did you support them, Tom?
Absolutely no. Sorry. This is a fundamental point. Just because I support the right of anyone to burn a British flag that they own. There was a case in this in the 1990s in the United States. Texas tried to ban the burning of American flags. The Supreme Court stepped in and cancelled that law and made sure no one could be arrested for it because it's a speech act. If you own the American flag, you should be able... And what a wonderful example of American free speech rights. An absolutely heinous act that I deplore, but it's legal. In the same way, burning any religious book is obviously a heinous act. It's a morally cowardice sort of act to do. But my goodness me, in a free society, should it not be legal?
In a society where people are facing increased dangers to their own safety because of targeting of those groups, the groups of people who, the Quran represents as Muslims, and, the rise of Islamophobic crimes and hatred in the streets is clear. It'd be the same with somebody burning a copy of the Torah. I am not religious. I'm an atheist. I don't believe in any religious book. I don't hold them sacred at all.
But you clearly do hold them sacred if you think it should be illegal.
James, unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap up because we've ran out of time. But can I just get from you in one word, yes or no, would you feel the same way about the burning of the Bible?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I would feel the same. Any kind of group that has something that represents them. Obviously, the connotations with the Quran are a bit more mixed because of the race element that comes into it as well. However, I would defend the anger of the burning of the Bible as well. Yeah,
Right,
absolutely.
so I'm afraid that is all we've got time for. Thank you for your little closing short comment there. And we'll definitely have more of that after the break. This is Good Afternoon Britain. We'll be with you shortly.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Well, a new poll commissioned by Channel 4 shows that more than half of Gen Z believe that Britain should be ruled by a dictator. Seriously, they actually said that. Well, 1 in 3 would want an army. What's the army in charge? 1 in 3 want martial law.
There's something on the idea of some form of strong leadership. They have looked at British politics. They have looked at the politics in which they grow up in. And they see failures at the democratic level. They see a weak, a soft, a centre that doesn't do anything, makes promises and fails to deliver them. They see nothing actually happening. And they also see a future where they have no democratic engagement because they're never going to have a house. They're never going to have a family. Why would they? Why would they be able to? So the idea of having somebody strong to come through and blow away the cobwebs of our current system, I can see that being attractive. When I grew up, I was talking to not that old men and women who had been through the war, who knew what dictatorship was. Up until the 70s, we were in the Cold War. People knew what dictatorship was. They knew people being locked up, being sent to Siberia. They knew what this meant. And I don't think anybody under the age of 34 actually has a clue. It's all the other side of the world. It's in North Korea. It's in China. It's not here, and it's not part of their lived experience. And that's a big change.
And I wonder, actually, Nigel, if a lot of these people think, I don't know, like Donald Trump's a dictator. He got elected with a huge mandate. Do they understand what dictators is? Or, actually, are young people just so listless? They're so feeble-minded, they need to be told what to do and how to live.
I certainly think that Gwen's right about there's a disillusionment with democracy and the results of it. The idea that a dictatorship is the answer to it, or having the military rule over us, is obvious nonsense.
GB News, the People's Channel.
We
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, good afternoon, Britain. At 28 minutes past 2, we're still reeling from an extraordinary speech at the Munich Security Conference from the US Vice President J.D. Vance.
I think they're going to be needing to convalesce after that. I really don't think that they expected that, and I don't think they will know what just hit them, because it's so outside of the box for what usually occurs in speeches at these sorts of conferences. I don't think that they will have really ever had anybody speak so straightforwardly about those fundamental issues like mass migration, freedom of speech. He set off every single landmine, every sensitive subject, including the burning of the Quran. And what was so fascinating, we just had on James Mathewson, the former Labour advisor, and he was saying, arguing against J.D. Vance, saying that this doesn't, he doesn't agree with these values that J.D. Vance is promoting. But from what I could see, he was promoting the values of democracy, freedom of speech. He was really knuckling down on, those fundamental core principles that make defence make sense.
Yeah. Well, of course, it was a speech that barely mentioned defence and instead focused on migration and free speech. So who better to speak to than the legal officer at the Free Speech Union, Stephen O'Grady. Stephen, this was a landmark moment and really showed the difference, I think, perhaps, in government's attitude on either side of the Atlantic.
Absolutely, yes. I think it shows a difference between the two sides of the Atlantic, but also a reshift in American policy on these matters, where they're becoming far more interventionist in a sense and pointing out, actually, we do want to uphold these fundamental values, these liberties and so on, and we'll take steps to do this. We saw quite recently that there was some talk about revisiting the Online Safety Act and the fetters that it would be placing on tech companies, and that was as a result of the implicit threat, at least it was, by Trump in order to, he was looking to place tariffs on the UK. So they flexing a bit of muscle in order to say, listen, you need to get on board with this. These are liberties that, after all, came from the Enlightenment in Europe and were our bequest to America. They've nurtured them, and now they're upholding them and perhaps reminding us of where we are.
And Stephen, he mentioned three things in relation to the UK specifically. He mentioned hate crime laws like those in Scotland and the fear that they might criminalise people in their own homes. He mentioned the burning of Quran, and he also mentioned the issue of silent prayer inside your head near abortion facilities. What was your take hearing that from not just from the Vice President of the United States in Europe, but in the context of the Munich Security Conference, framing freedom of speech as a security issue?
It absolutely is. And interestingly, if we look at the history of freedom of speech in this country, it is largely founded in ideas of religious liberty, one way or the other, either the freedom to manifest your own religious beliefs or to question established religious beliefs. We can go back to the 1600s, nonconformism and that. And it's interesting that two of his points related to that and the way in which those can in turn spill over into public order. So we saw the example of the silent prayer, which I should think to an American looks appalling. The idea of locking somebody up or criminally sanctioning them for that. Ultimately, it is a little more complex, as these issues tend to be, because it's about the religious liberty to manifest beliefs and the.
What seemed a little bit less clear to me And certainly,
Oh, I'm sorry, do continue.
Talking.
No, sorry,
Yes.
it's just nice background.
Freedom to manifest those beliefs against the freedom of people to visit the abortion clinics, and the view that they should be able to do so unimpeded. And then similarly with the Quran, again, it's something that we've seen a number of instances of across Europe quite recently, people burning it, and how that can spill over into public order, and in turn, public order is the means by which domestic security is secured, and that has tie-ins to all kinds of other issues, concerns
Stephen,
about migration and so on.
The Free Speech Union have been very forthright, particularly on issues to do with non-crime hate incidents and Islamophobia, which obviously is relevant to the burning of the Quran that JD Vance mentioned in his speech.
Yes.
What's the view of the Free Speech Union, or you personally, whichever you prefer, on how important freedom of speech is actually in combating extremism?
Well, I think both my view and the FSU's align on that it's absolutely the way to go about doing it. The sort of old saying that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and the idea that you combat bad ideas with better ideas, allow people to ventilate their bad ideas. We can contest them, we can argue against them, we can show them up for how dangerous or foolish or whatever it is that they are. So absolutely, it is something that we should be combating. As soon as you keep a lid on it, it's driven underground, it festers, and then it lurks in dark corners, and when it comes out, it tends to be a lot worse than if we had just dealt with it there and then.
OK, well, Stephen O'Grady, legal officer at the Free Speech Union, thanks so much for joining us for that instant reaction to, again, a bombshell speech. Well, do stay with us here on GB News. Much more reaction and, frankly, the aftershocks to that speech after your latest news headlines. Very good afternoon to you from the newsroom, just after 2:30. Well, as we've just been hearing, the US Vice President JD Vance has addressed the Munich Security Conference, responding to Volodymyr Zelensky's concerns over a lack of a ready US plan to end the war in Ukraine. It comes after Donald Trump spoke with Vladimir Putin and agreed to work very closely together to end the conflict, raising concerns in Europe. Ukraine's president, though, says Putin isn't preparing for peace, but to continue deceiving the world, and insists any peace deal must guarantee Ukraine's independence. Well, Vance also praised Munich's hospitality, despite the city reeling from yesterday's car attack and left 30 injured, some seriously. The 24-year-old Afghan asylum seeker responsible has been arrested and is due in court on Friday. Vance also warned that the biggest threat facing the West is not external, but he says from within. Well, Pope Francis is being admitted to hospital today for tests and treatment for bronchitis. That's according to the Vatican. The 88-year-old has battled long bouts of the illness and was diagnosed last week. Despite that, he's continued his duties indoors, but has struggled with mobility and suffered 2 recent falls. He'll be treated after completing his audiences today. An Indian man has been found guilty of raping and murdering Irish backpacker Daniel McLaughlin in Goa in 2017. Vikat Bhagat attacked the 28-year-old and her body was discovered in a field the next day. Her family say justice has finally been achieved after an 8-year-long trial. A post-mortem found she died from brain damage and strangulation, and they're now watching to see what further legal steps will follow. And it's a real-life whale tale, a whale of a... Let's just check what that says to be certain. It's a real-life whale of a tale. There we go. A kayaker's close encounter with a humpback whale has gone viral after being briefly trapped in the whale's mouth off the Chilean Patagonia. Adrian Simancas was kayaking with his father when the massive creature surfaced and took a quick nibble of his kayak. His father, just meters away, caught the jaw-dropping footage on video and urged his son to stay calm. He thought he'd been eaten and swallowed, he said, but he was released unharmed. I'm glad to say that is it from me for this afternoon. Sophia Wensler will have your full update at 3 o'clock, and Tom and Emma will be straight back with you very shortly.
Hello, it's time for your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Now, some of us will see a few sunny breaks today. In fact, some places will have some prolonged sunshine, but for most, largely cloudy, and we have some wet weather coming in from the southwest. That's in association with a frontal system that's gradually making its way northeastwards, and worth bearing in mind that this is going to hit against some relatively cold air. As a result, we could see something a bit wintry, particularly over the high ground of Wales, maybe Northern Ireland as well. Some sleet, some snow, perhaps even a little bit of freezing rain, but for most towards the west-southwest, it's just going to be outbreaks of rain. Like I said, some sunshine further east, but temperatures still a bit below average. Most places only getting to highs in the mid-single figures, something a bit milder trying to come in from the west. So across parts of Wales, southwest England, a bit of a cloudy, damp end to the day. The rain doesn't look especially heavy for the time being, but it is going to pep up a bit as we go overnight. Some heavier bursts perhaps across Northern Ireland, but further north and east, a drier end to the day and some clearer skies to start the night across parts of Scotland and northeast England. And so here temperatures are going to take a little bit of a dip. An early frost is quite likely for some places here. Otherwise, through the night then, we are going to see that rain gradually making its way northeastwards and, as I mentioned, hitting against this colder air. So some snow likely over modest higher ground of parts of Scotland and northern England, and even the potential for some freezing rain. Remember, freezing rain gives some very treacherous icy conditions, so do watch out for that early tomorrow morning. Otherwise, temperatures a little bit on the low side towards the north and east, but further west we have that milder air coming in, so not an especially chilly start to the day. Otherwise, as we go through tomorrow then, quite a lot of wet weather around, but it is gradually making its way northeastwards. So in the south-southwest, turning drier and perhaps even brighter by the afternoon. In the southeast, avoiding most of the rain, and also across the far north of Scotland too, avoiding the most of the wet weather as well.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon, I'm Russell Holding. On the M60 in Greater Manchester, there's a lane closed anti-clockwise where someone has a puncture between junctions 16 and 15 from Pendlebury to the Swinton interchange. On the M6 in the West Midlands, 2 out of 4 lanes are closed southbound at junction 10, the Walton-Wolverhampton turn after an accident. Long delays with queues from junction 10A4, the M54. There's disruption to train services in the Gloucester area because of a signalling problem. Now delays of up to an hour and a half to trains through Stevenage in Hertfordshire after an incident. In London, the A11 is closed along the Broadway in Stratford for an investigation causing delays. In East Sussex, the A27 is closed in both directions through the Southwick Tunnel, where overnight roadworks have overrun. There are long delays each way towards there and as you divert. And Penzance helicopter flights to and from the Isles of Scilly are cancelled because of poor weather conditions.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is now 20 to 3, and the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, has been speaking this afternoon about Rachel Reeves and her CV adjustment and a potential Conservative Reform Party electoral pact. Let's discuss it all with our GB News political editor, Christopher Hope. Chris, first of all, Kemi Badenoch was responding to your exclusive interview with the Father of the House.
That's right. All the chat away from our studio in the pubs and bars in Westminster is how will the right unite to take on Labour? Otherwise, if they're still split, Keir Starmer can win power again for a second term with maybe a third of the votes because of this division between Reform UK and the Tory party. So we interviewed Sir Edward Lee. He's the Father of the House of Commons, the most senior MP in all the Commons and a Tory MP too, about what he felt about the likelihood and should the Reform UK and the Tories come together. And this is what he had to say to us.
What are the odds on Reform and the Tories merging to be one party at the next election?
Oh, I think very high. I mean...
odds on?
70%.
So, 70% likelihood of merging. He thinks that 1 in 3 Tory MPs want a merger. He says, what's the point in fighting with Reform? We agree on most things. Let's come together. He also said on Kemi Badenoch, when I asked, would she be the leader at the next election, he said, I have no idea. I wish her well. Well, that leader, Kemi Badenoch, has just replied to those comments now, and here's what Kemi Badenoch had to say about Edward Lee's call for a merger between Reform UK and the Tories.
I'm afraid I do disagree with Sir Edward. Everyone is entitled to their opinion, but the Conservative Party is under new leadership. It is important that people know what we stand for. And the public are tired of backroom deals and not getting what it is that they vote for. What I need to make sure is that people can see that we are the party demonstrating true and authentic Conservative principles.
That's Kevin Badenoch responding to what Edward Lee is saying, but if one in three of her own MPs want this merger, you know, how long can she be saying this can't happen?
Has she put herself in a difficult position? Because she only just said that it's for the birds, this idea of some kind of pact with reform. Is she maybe trying to sort of keep her powder dry for a little longer without completely closing the door further down the line? It seems like it might be a bit of a risky strategy.
It could be. I mean, she's barely into the job. She's 4 months in as Tory party leader. Everyone's talking about this merger. I think there's issues of the leadership. I think she doesn't want it. Nigel Farage says, why would I bother with Tories when I'm leading in the polls? Other people in Tory party may do a merger, other senior Tories there. So whether, you know, the clock is ticking on her leadership is a different question altogether.
I mean, is the problem here not that the Reform Party, or the previous iteration of it, the Brexit Party, did do a deal with Boris Johnson in 2019. They stood down in all Tory seats. That helped Boris Johnson get his big majority.
Not all, but about a third of them.
I think they stood down in every single Tory-held seat. Not every seat in the country. Arguments that if they'd stood down in every seat, Boris had got a bigger majority. But clearly, Farage and the Reform lot feel burnt by that pact, by that deal. It's almost as if it's not on the Conservative Party to say we want a deal, but the other guys, the Reform guys.
That's right. He's really hurt about the way he's treated. He felt he never got a full thanks from the team around Boris for literally bequeathing that 80-seat majority to Johnson, which he then subtorched through his own, frankly, lack of discipline.
But arguably, it's not just that this is sort of in Farage's gift, as it were, but actually that at this stage, given the polling, and obviously it's quite different now than compared to if it were right before a general election, but as it currently stands, and seemingly from the opinion polls, this is actually something that would be in the interests of the Conservative Party rather than in the interests of reform.
It seems that way, and at some point, senior people in the Tory party are going to look at this and go, well, if we come together, we stop 5 years of a Labour government, and is that in the better interest than just worrying about who's in charge of the Tory or even Reform UK party? I think Farage is inked in, not only because he actually owns the company, which is Reform UK, currently, until the reforms take place, we're promised. But I think, Kevin Badenoch, she wants time. She pulled out a policy last week on citizenship, I thought very good. That's trying to say, if you come here, you've got to be a contributor to this country to be British. That was a good policy last week. But as Edward Lee says, he has told Ms Badenoch in no uncertain terms, we need a firm immigration policy by the May elections or we'll be slaughtered at the polls. So these crises moments for her are not going to go away and may get worse.
That May election date will be a really, really important point. Even though many counties now not having elections, I mean, it could still be a bit of a reckoning for the Conservative Party. But elsewhere, of course, today we've been talking about the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. Some real questions raised over her expense account as a retail bank manager before she was elected as an MP.
That's right. Two things have happened here. The BBC have done a 3-month investigation into her past before she was an MP. The first thing I found out was that she exaggerated on her LinkedIn page, an online CV, how long she worked for the Bank of England. That's been cut down again by 9 months. 2 edits to that page in 3 months. Embarrassing, but maybe that's all it is. But more difficult could be the claims about her expenses when she worked at the Halifax Bank of Scotland. There's something called a motivation credit card, which allowed people to give out the presents to good-performing employees, handbags, perfumes, the kind of thing you get at work, I'm sure, wine, that sort of thing. But there's claims that...
150-odd pound handbag, yes, please.
Claims that she's being investigated by Halifax Bank of Scotland. She denies that all her expenses were cleared, they tell us. But that has brought Kevin Badenoch into the fray, and she said this earlier to reporters about what she thinks is happening with Rachel Reeves' expenses.
What do you think she should do? Should she resign?
I think she's got some very, very serious questions to answer. Keir Starmer said that he was bringing in a government of integrity. He's lost one minister due to corruption allegations. Another one has had to resign because of fraud that was committed while she was working. And this is pretty close to that. Telling lies and untruths on your CV, expenses fraud, which is what the allegations are very serious things. And I do think she needs to come out and explain what's going on. But this is a government that is not serious, that doesn't have a plan for the country, made claims that are shown not to be true, has broken lots of promises. We as the opposition, the Conservative Party, will be holding them to account.
My second question from the pool, how concerning is it that President...
That's Kemi Badenoch there with her response to the Rachel Reeves allegations. Now, to be finally clear, we are told by Reeves' spokesman that she wasn't aware of any investigation, nor was she interviewed, nor did she face any disciplinary action on this or any other matters. All expenses were submitted and signed off in the proper way.
Goodness me, much to digest there, Christopher Hope. As ever, thanks for joining us. But now, if you at home are in search of some winter sun, here's your latest forecast for those top European holiday destinations.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
If you're looking to escape the cold weather in the UK and find some winter sun, it will be fine in Spain this weekend, but rather unsettled through much of Italy and Greece, an area of low pressure, and the Burao wind for Croatia continues to blow very strong, particularly towards the north. Meanwhile, much more settled weather, above average temperatures and plenty of sunshine through the Balearics, Spain as well, but an area of rain is going to push into Portugal, and that's going to likely affect parts of the Canaries next few days.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying. Maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation,
no,
isn't it? Because the failure is...
You're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop star to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just gone 10 to 3. And joining us in the studio, of course, hosting the show from 3, it's the one and only Martin Daubney. And Martin, really wanted your reaction to the extraordinary moment in Munich when the Vice President of the US stood up on the stage and gave the speech practically no one in the room wanted to hear.
King Kong energy. That's what I think it is. Now, I've sat and watched Nigel Farage at the European Union, but they knew what was coming. They knew they were going to get their heads torn off. When JD Vance came in, he did not give a flying fig about anything to do with their politics, about their worldview. He went in with an agenda, alpha, adrenaline, what purpose, what poise, disruptive, smashed it to matchwood. I think that's a taste of what we're going to get from the Trump administration. And for me, as a former politician, that is what politics should be about. Not cosy talking shops, roll a grenade in and walk away.
I can't stop thinking about the comparison with David Cameron's speech at the Munich Security Conference, often held up as this quite robust speech, and it pales in comparison to this. Have you ever seen anything like it?
No, I mean, Cameron was Toy Town compared to this, and I think that's what's so exciting about this deep reset of what we've got to come over the next 4 years, and sending out so many broadsides about don't you dare meddle with social media, don't you dare try and control our free speech on X, on Facebook. You know, they've got rid of Biden, and now they're going to take on the EU. And if they go for them, they're going to slap taxes on the trade war on free speech. It's joyous.
There will be people who say there are serious things being discussed at the Munich Security Conference. I mean, the position of China, Russia, North Korea, Iran. I mean, the external threats that these countries are facing. And I suppose the point of criticism towards JD Vance would be he spent more time criticising Germany, France, the United Kingdom and Sweden than he did Russia, China, North Korea and Iran.
But his number one mission, I think, now is to make sure they cough up for their NATO dues. And so by criticising them on their historic failure to deal with the threat of the eastward-bound power of Putin, of Russia before that. This is a statement of intent. We are the adults in the room. We're not afraid of you. Pull your socks up, put the full financial contribution in. And by the way, if you even think about criticising our free speech, we are going to annihilate you. I thought it was a flamethrower. And I haven't seen anything as powerful as that since Nigel Farage used to stand up. But as I said, they saw that coming. They did not see any of this coming today.
He really laid out his stall, didn't he? He made defence make sense again.
Yeah, it's just joyous.
It's that interesting comparison. What are we defending from, but also what are we defending for? And that was a very interesting line that I think historians are going to come back to and look at after this. Well, my goodness me, Martin, you've got a barnstorming 3 hours ahead of you. We'll be watching, of course. So Martin's up next. Don't go anywhere.
Boris Johnson's on the show.
Heavy showers first thing will be followed by a warm, cosy day. Boxed boilers. Sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello again. Here's your latest GB News weather update from the Met Office. Now, as we go into this weekend, we are going to see some wet weather pushing its way northeastwards, and as that is hitting against some relatively cold air, we're going to see a bit of snow, even a bit of freezing rain across some places. So that could cause some treacherous conditions. But through the rest of today, it's actually, well, not looking too bad across the eastern side of the country. Some clearer skies as we head towards the evening here. Further west and southwest, it's a cloudy, damp end to the day with some rain pushing its way through. The rain turning heavier across parts of the southwest overnight, and like I said, there will be some hill snow mixed in, even a bit of freezing rain as well. Some places will dip a bit below freezing where we get clear skies to start the night, but many places starting to turn milder from the west-southwest, with something a little bit milder pushing its way in as we go through into tomorrow. Otherwise, and first thing tomorrow morning, a few showers started around some eastern parts of Scotland, but also some wintriness over the higher ground here, so some sleet, some snow quite likely. Starting to see the back end of the rain across Northern Ireland, but nonetheless a damp start. Meanwhile, across parts of Northern England into Wales and southwest England, a wet start to the day, and across parts of Northern England in particular, here we have the greatest risk of some snow accumulations building up 2 to 5 centimetres above higher ground, and even some freezing rain leading to some pretty icy surfaces as we go through tomorrow. In the southeast, worth bearing in mind that the rain doesn't actually reach many places here, so staying largely dry, and in the southwest we'll have something bright brighter feeding in as we go into the afternoon. And with that, temperatures here getting just about into double figures. Elsewhere, despite the milder air that's coming through, because of the cloud, the rain, the sleet, the snow, it is going to stay a little bit on the chilly side. More cloudy, wet weather to come for many places, particularly across the central slice of the UK as we go through tomorrow evening. But like I say, some clearer skies towards the southwest. There may be something a little bit brighter for a time as we go into the beginning of next week, but rain not too far away towards the west.
Expect a warm front, moving from the kitchen right through to the rest of the house. Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
We're doubling your chances to win in our latest Great British giveaway with 2 fabulous prize bundles up for grabs. There's 2 lots of a totally tax-free £10,000 in cash. You'll also receive a brand new iPhone 16 along with £500 in shopping vouchers to spend at your favourite store. And the best news is 2 lucky winners are going to win. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. 1 entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
It's the body image thing that concerns me. It's young girls watching Love Island and really skinny girls and young boys
hit the gym but after this. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, they're seeing perfect bodies on the screen.
You don't need to go in the gym, Eamon. You look gorgeous as you are, love.
I know. You see, the reason I don't enter anything like that, Kerry, is you know
you're going to win.
Exactly. And it's not fair. It's not fair, I think, on everybody else being there.
It's not fair.
No.
But Kerry, what do you think about the body image thing? You know, when you talk about your daughter, is that something that you'd worry about, her comparing herself to the likes of what she sees on the screen?
Now, this is where there's a conflict of interest for me, because I've been brought up in this industry since I was 17, so it's massively affected me. I mean, when you're put on the front cover of magazines after having a baby with a stretch mark in the circle of shame, you know, it does do a psychological effect on you. I think a lot of celebrities who have been around for so many years, as I have been affected by that. But everyone has to bear in mind, I've had my children. I'm in my 40s. I feel I'm entitled to have my tweaks and try and improve on what I think are going down south, and health and safety, tripping over any things that I don't want to be tripping over anymore. But I definitely do believe, I mean, majority of the young girls that go on Love Island, they all have the same big lips, the same big eyelashes, all the butt implants, and they're barely in their 20s. You know, it's if you go to the airport now, I remember going to the airport and I looked around and all the girls looked exactly the same.
GB News, the People's Channel.